What makes this climax work so effectively is that it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface level, it is an action spectacle: fights, chases, a ticking bomb, a zip-line escape, the kind of kinetic physical cinema that Jackie Chan built his career on and that audiences came to Rush Hour 2 specifically to experience. Beneath that surface, however, the climax is an emotional and moral drama about justice, truth, grief, and the particular kind of closure that comes from finally understanding something painful that has been unresolved for years. The film is smart enough to know that the action means nothing without the emotional stakes, and those stakes are entirely personal to Lee. While Lee moves to pursue the larger confrontation with Ricky Tan, Carter faces his own final battle, a direct physical confrontation with Lee, the film's most dangerous and consistently threatening antagonist. Throughout Rush Hour 2, Lee has been established as someone operating at a level of violence and ruthlessness that neither Lee nor Carter can take lightly. She shot Ricky Tan on the yacht. She shot Molina in the casino. She taped a grenade in Lee's mouth with the casual efficiency of someone who does terrible things so regularly they have become routine. She is not a villain who underestimates the protagonists or makes the kinds of prideful mistakes that lesser movie antagonists make. She is competent, cold, and committed to the criminal operation she serves with absolute dedication. Carter fighting and ultimately defeating Lee is therefore a significant dramatic achievement for his character, and the film earns it through the specific and wonderfully absurd circumstances of how the defeat is delivered. Carter does not beat Lee through superior martial arts skill, that would be dishonest to everything the film has established for his character, and the film earns it through the specific and wonderfully absurd circumstances of how the defeat is delivered. Carter does not beat Lee through superior martial arts skill, that would be dishonest to everything the film has established about both characters. He is not a trained fighter in the way that Lee is, and Lee is at least Lee's equal in terms of combat capability. Instead, Carter defeats her accidentally, knocking her out with a spear in circumstances that owe more to chaos and fortune than to skill or planning. This is entirely right for Carter as a character. His victories throughout the Rush Hour franchise have never been the clean, technically precise victories of a martial arts master. They have always been messy, improvised, often partly accidental, and achieved through a combination of determination, instinct, and the particular kind of luck that seems to attach itself to people who refuse to give up even when giving up would be the rational choice. Carter knocking Lee out with a spear is funny precisely because it is so Carter. He did not plan it, he could not replicate it, and he is probably as surprised as she is that it worked. But it worked, and the result is the same regardless of the elegance or lack thereof in its execution. One of the film's most formidable villains is neutralized, and Carter, loud, stubborn, perpetually out of his depth in combat terms but never out of his depth in terms of sheer will, is the one who neutralizes her. In the casino's penthouse, the film delivers one of its most dramatically satisfying moments of poetic justice. Stephen Rain, the billionaire architect of the entire superdollar scheme, the wealthy man behind the curtain whose social respectability provided cover for one of the most sophisticated financial crimes in the film's world, is in the process of attempting to escape with the engraving plates when Ricky Tan catches up to him. The confrontation between Rain and Tan in the penthouse is brief but loaded with meaning. Rain represents the American side of the criminal partnership, the money, the infrastructure, the legitimate face that made the entire operation possible. Tan represents the Hong Kong triad side, the criminal network, the manufacturing capability, the street-level enforcement and violence that protected the operation. Their partnership was always one of mutual exploitation rather than genuine alliance, and the moment the operation begins to collapse around them, the pretense of partnership collapses with it. Ricky Tan fatally stabs Stephen Rain before Lee arrives. This moment accomplishes several things simultaneously. It eliminates one of the two primary villains through the internal logic of criminal self-interest rather than through the direct intervention of the protagonists, which is dramatically satisfying because it demonstrates that criminal partnerships built on exploitation rather than genuine trust inevitably destroy themselves from within. It also removes the one person, Rain, who might have been positioned to broker some kind of deal or institutional protection against full accountability. and it concentrates the final dramatic confrontation into a single, deeply personal encounter between Lee and Ricky Tan, unmediated by the presence of other villains who might dilute the emotional intensity of that moment. Rain's death at Tan's hands is also a form of justice, albeit a rough and extra-legal one. He is not going to face prosecution, not going to stand in a courtroom and be held accountable through institutional processes. But he is also not going to escape. The $100 million in super dollars, the deaths of the U.S. customs agents, the bombing at the consulate, the shooting of Molina, none of these things are going to translate into profit and immunity for Stephen Rain. His wealth and his respectability, the twin shields that have protected him throughout the investigation, cannot protect him from the consequences of the criminal world he chose to involve himself in. There is a brutal logic to his end that the film presents without sentimentality. When Lee and Carter confront Ricky Tan in the penthouse, the film arrives at the moment it has been building toward since the first mention of Tan's name in Hong Kong. This is not primarily an action confrontation, though it becomes physical. It is first and foremost a confrontation about truth, about what really happened to Lee's father, about who was responsible, and about what Ricky Tan has been carrying all these years behind the facade of triad power and criminal enterprise. At the very heart of Rush Hour 2 lies one of the most entertaining and culturally significant buddy cop partnerships in Hollywood history, that of Chief Inspector Lee, played by Jackie Chan, and Lap Detective James Carter, played by Chris Tucker. This dynamic is not merely a plot device but rather the soul of the entire film, the engine that drives every scene, every joke, every action sequence, and every emotional beat. Understanding this partnership in full requires examining not just what the two characters do together on screen, but what they represent, how they contrast, how they complement each other, and why audiences around the world responded to them so enthusiastically in 2001 and continue to do so decades later. The foundation built in the first film. To truly appreciate Lee and Carter's partnership in Rush Hour 2, it is essential to acknowledge the foundation laid in the original Rush Hour, 1998. In that film, the two characters began as reluctant collaborators, polar opposites forced together by circumstance. Lee was a disciplined, focused, and deeply respectful Hong Kong police officer who communicated largely through action and quiet professionalism. Carter was a loud, brash, self-aggrandizing Los Angeles detective who talked endlessly, often saying very little of practical value while simultaneously being charming enough that audiences could not help but love him. Their initial relationship was defined by friction, misunderstanding, cultural confusion, and the basic comedic tension of two very different people being thrown into a high-stakes situation together. By the end of Rush Hour, however, they had earned each other's respect. They had saved lives together, cracked a major case, and formed a genuine bond that went beyond professional obligation. That bond, hard-won, authentic, and layered with warmth beneath all the bickering, is what Rush Hour 2 inherits and then expands upon significantly. One of the smartest structural decisions in Rush Hour 2 is the decision to set much of the film in Hong Kong rather than Los Angeles. In the first film, Lee was the fish out of water, a man navigating the unfamiliar streets and customs of America while trying to conduct a police investigation. In Rush Hour 2, that dynamic is deliberately and cleverly reversed. Now it is Carter who finds himself in foreign territory, surrounded by a language he does not speak, a culture he does not understand, and a city that operates by entirely different rules. This reversal is comedically rich and narratively intelligent. Carter, who in Los Angeles operates with a certain swagger and authority, suddenly becomes helpless in ways he is completely unprepared for. He cannot communicate with locals, he cannot flash his lapped badge and expect automatic deference, and he cannot rely on the street knowledge and social currency that makes him effective at home. Every attempt Carter makes to assert himself in Hong Kong is met with confusion, indifference, or outright laughter. He tries to intimidate people who simply do not understand what he is saying. He attempts to use American cultural references that mean absolutely nothing in a Hong Kong context. He is, for perhaps the first time in his life, genuinely and completely out of his depth. Lee, meanwhile, is entirely in his element. Hong Kong is his city. He knows the streets, the people, the criminal underworld, the social hierarchies, and the unwritten rules. He moves through it with a quiet confidence that contrasts beautifully with Carter's loud disorientation. This reversal does not diminish Carter's character but rather humanizes him in new ways. We see beneath the bravado to something more vulnerable, and the film uses that vulnerability to generate both comedy and genuine character development. The language of brotherhood. What makes the Lee and Carter partnership particularly compelling is the way the film communicates their brotherhood not just through dialogue but through behavior, instinct, and the subtle body language that comes from two actors who have developed real chemistry over multiple years of working together. Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker are genuinely fond of each other in real life, and that affection bleeds through the screen in ways that cannot be manufactured or faked. There are numerous moments throughout Rush Hour 2 where the two characters act in sync without needing to discuss strategy or coordinate verbally. They have developed a shared rhythm, an intuitive understanding of how the other person thinks and moves. In action sequences, this manifests as a kind of physical partnership where Chan's martial arts mastery and Tucker's instinctive, improvisational energy actually complement each other in surprising ways. Carter is never going to outfight Lee in a technical sense, but his unpredictability and willingness to do something completely unexpected often creates the opening that Lee needs to finish the job. This physical and instinctive partnership mirrors their emotional one. They argue constantly, but the arguments come from a place of genuine investment in each other. Carter argues with Lee because he cares about what Lee thinks. Lee tolerates Carter's endless monologues because he recognizes, beneath all the noise, a loyal and genuinely brave partner. Neither of them would function as well without the other, and the film knows this and leans into it at every opportunity. This cultural exchange is never mean-spirited. The film does not mock either culture but rather finds humor in the genuine difficulty of cross-cultural communication and the beautiful absurdity of two people from completely different worlds becoming, against all odds, genuine friends. In 2001, this kind of intercultural buddy comedy was particularly valuable in a Hollywood landscape that often struggled to present non-American cultures with any real depth or respect. The stakes of the villainous plot and what it reveals about the partnership. The central crime story of Rush Hour 2, involving Ricky Tan's triad operation, a counterfeit superdollar scheme, and the murder of U.S. Customs agents, functions as the pressure that tests and ultimately validates the Lee and Carter partnership. It is worth noting that the case hits Lee in a deeply personal way. Ricky Tan was once his father's partner, which means that Lee's investigation is not purely professional but emotionally charged with questions of betrayal, legacy, and justice. His father was a police officer who died under circumstances connected to Tan, and uncovering the truth means confronting a painful chapter in his family history. Carter, who initially arrives in Hong Kong simply hoping to enjoy a vacation with his friend, finds himself drawn into a case that has enormous personal significance for Lee. The way Carter handles this, not by minimizing it, not by making it about himself, but by simply staying present and committed, is one of the film's quieter emotional accomplishments. Carter is loud and self-absorbed in many ways, but when Lee genuinely needs him, Carter is there without hesitation. He does not fully understand the emotional depth of what Lee is dealing with, but he understands enough to know that his friend needs him, and that is sufficient. This loyalty under pressure is what elevates the Rush Hour partnership above simple comedy. These are not just two funny people trading jokes. They are two people who have chosen each other as partners in the fullest sense of the word, and they demonstrate that choice repeatedly throughout the film, especially when the danger is most serious. Las Vegas and the third act. When the film shifts its setting to Las Vegas for its climactic third act, both characters are once again on somewhat neutral ground, neither Hong Kong nor Los Angeles, but a glittering, chaotic American city that operates by its own bizarre logic. This setting allows both characters to operate at roughly equal footing again, and the film uses this to bring their partnership to its most dynamic and explosive expression. The casino sequences in Las Vegas are among the most entertaining in the entire Rush Hour franchise, blending action, comedy, and spectacle in ways that showcase both Chan's physical virtuosity and Tucker's comedic timing at their absolute peaks. Crucially, both characters are essential to the resolution of the case. It is not a story where Lee is the real hero and Carter is the comic relief, or where Carter somehow saves the day through dumb luck. They solve the problem together, each contributing something the other cannot provide, which is precisely this loyalty under pressure is what elevates the Rush Hour partnership above simple comedy. These are not just two funny people trading jokes. They are two people who have chosen each other as partners in the fullest sense of the word, and they demonstrate that choice repeatedly throughout the film, especially when the danger is most serious. Las Vegas and the third act. When the film shifts its setting to Las Vegas for its climactic third act, both characters are once again on somewhat neutral ground, neither Hong Kong nor Los Angeles, but a glittering, chaotic American city that operates by its own bizarre logic. This setting allows both characters to operate at roughly equal footing again, and the film uses this to bring their partnership to its most dynamic and explosive expression. The casino sequences in Las Vegas are among the most entertaining in the entire Rush Hour franchise, blending action, comedy, and spectacle in ways that showcase both Chan's physical virtuosity and Tucker's comedic timing at their absolute peaks. Crucially, both characters are essential to the resolution of the case. It is not a story where Lee is the real hero and Carter is the comic relief, or where Carter somehow saves the day through dumb luck. They solve the problem together, each contributing something the other cannot provide, which is precisely the formula that makes buddy cop partnerships work at their best. Rush Hour 2 grossed $347.5 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film in the franchise and one of the top 5 domestic earners of 2001. While the action sequences, the direction by Brett Ratner, and the exotic settings all contributed to that success, the overwhelming reason audiences turned out in such enormous numbers was the Lee and Carter partnership itself. Jackie Chan had spent decades building a global reputation as one of cinema's greatest physical performers, but his English-language persona had never quite found the perfect vehicle until the Rush Hour franchise gave him Lee. Chris Tucker, despite enormous natural talent, had never found a role that fully harnessed his particular energy until Carter. Together, they created something that neither could have achieved separately, a comedic and emotional chemistry so potent that it transcended cultural and linguistic boundaries to entertain audiences everywhere from America to Hong Kong to Europe to Africa. Formula that makes buddy cop partnerships work at their best. The partnership works because it is built on genuine respect and genuine difference. Lee and Carter are not alike, and the film never pretends they are. Their friendship is not built on similarity but on complementarity, on the recognition that the other person possesses something valuable that you lack, and that together you are more capable, more effective, and more alive than you would be apart. Legacy of the partnership. The Lee and Carter dynamic established in Rush Hour and deepened in Rush Hour 2 went on to influence an entire generation of buddy cop comedies that followed. The specific combination of cross-cultural comedy, genuine emotional warmth, spectacular action, and the particular chemistry of two wildly mismatched personalities who somehow belong together became a template that many films attempted to replicate with varying degrees of success. Very few achieved what Rush Hour 2 achieved, because the specific alchemy of Chan and Tucker is irreplaceable. In the end, Rush Hour 2 is best understood not as an action film with comedy elements or a comedy with action elements, but as a film fundamentally about friendship, about what it means to choose someone as your partner across every difference of culture, personality. In the end, Rush Hour 2 is best understood not as an action film with comedy elements or a comedy with action elements, but as a film fundamentally about friendship, about what it means to choose someone as your partner across every difference of culture, personality, background, and temperament, and to remain loyal to that choice even when things get genuinely dangerous. Lee and Carter embody that kind of friendship with humor, heart, and an infectious energy that made Rush Hour 2 one of the most beloved and commercially successful films of its era. One of the most effective storytelling choices in Rush Hour 2 is the way it opens with the promise of something light and carefree before almost immediately pulling that promise away. 3 days after the events that concluded the previous chapter of their adventures, specifically after Lee and Carter successfully rescued a Chinese diplomat's daughter, the two friends find themselves in Hong Kong together, ostensibly on vacation. This setup is brilliant in its simplicity. After the intensity and danger of their previous shared experience, the idea of Lee and Carter simply relaxing together in Hong Kong feels like a well-earned reward for them and for the audience. We want to see these two people we have come to love enjoying each other's company without a crisis looming over them. But of course, Rush Hour 2 has no interest in giving them that peace, and the speed with which their vacation evaporates tells us everything we need to know about the kind of film this is and the kind of lives these two characters lead. Almost before Carter has had a chance to fully appreciate being in Hong Kong, the world intervenes in the most dramatic way possible. A bomb detonates at the U.S. Consulate General, killing 2 undercover U.S. Customs agents and instantly transforming what was supposed to be a holiday into a murder investigation of international significance. This transition from vacation to crisis is handled with tremendous efficiency. The film does not waste time establishing the tranquil holiday that is about to be interrupted, it merely gestures at it, gives us just enough of Lee and Carter together in a relaxed context to remind us of their bond and establish the stakes emotionally, and then pulls the rug out from under everything. The bombing is not just a plot mechanism. It is a statement about who Lee and Carter are at their core, people for whom duty is not simply a professional obligation but an identity so deeply embedded that even holidays bend around it. Lee's assignment and the shadow of Ricky Tan. When Lee is assigned to investigate the bombing, the case immediately takes on dimensions that go far beyond a routine criminal investigation. As Lee begins digging into the circumstances of the explosion and the deaths of the 2 American customs agents, a name emerges that carries enormous weight: Ricky Tan. For the audience, Ricky Tan is introduced as a triad leader, a powerful figure in Hong Kong's criminal underworld who controls significant criminal enterprise. But for Lee, Ricky Tan is something far more complicated and far more painful than a simple criminal target. Ricky Tan was once the police partner of Lee's late father. This detail is the emotional axis around which the entire film rotates. In a single piece of information, the movie transforms what could have been a fairly standard criminal conspiracy plot into something deeply personal, morally complex, and emotionally resonant. Lee is not simply investigating a triad boss. He is potentially investigating someone his father trusted, someone who shared a bond of professional brotherhood with his father, someone who was supposed to stand for the same values of law and order that Lee's father dedicated his life to upholding. The fact that Lee's father is deceased adds another layer of weight to this discovery. Lee cannot ask his father about Ricky Tan. He cannot get answers directly from the source. He must piece together a picture of who Tan really was and what happened through investigation, through confrontation, and through the painful process of learning things about someone connected to his family history that he perhaps never wanted to know. This is a deeply human predicament, the experience of discovering that someone tied to a beloved and departed family member may not have been who they appeared to be, and the film handles it with enough seriousness to give the comedy around it genuine grounding. The massage parlor confrontation and the chaos that follows. In one of the film's most memorably absurd sequences, Lee and Carter attempt to question Ricky Tan at a massage parlor. What follows is a brawl with Ricky's bodyguards that escalates with the kind of rapid, escalating comedy that Rush Hour 2 does so well. The sequence culminates in Lee and Carter being forced to flee through the streets of Hong Kong completely naked, a scenario that is played entirely for laughs but also carries an interesting symbolic dimension. The 2 men who came to Hong Kong in positions of relative authority and dignity, one a respected chief inspector, the other a decorated lap detective, are stripped of everything, including their clothes, and sent running through the city in a state of complete vulnerability. This vulnerability is both physical and metaphorical. Carter, who has been navigating Hong Kong as an outsider throughout the film, suddenly finds himself even more exposed than usual. He is not just a foreigner in an unfamiliar city, he is a foreigner in an unfamiliar city without any of the markers of identity and authority that normally define him. His badge, his clothes, his wallet, and crucially his passport are all gone. The passport detail becomes immediately important because Carter, who has been at best a reluctant participant in this investigation, suddenly finds himself unable to simply leave and go back to Los Angeles even if he wanted to. He is trapped in Hong Kong by circumstance in a very literal and very funny way. His attempt to return to the massage parlor to retrieve his passport after getting dressed is classic Carter behavior, equal parts practical necessity and stubborn refusal to accept defeat, and it illustrates perfectly the way the film uses comedy to keep its characters moving through the story while simultaneously revealing character. Carter going back for his passport is not just about the passport. It is about Carter asserting himself, refusing to be humiliated without pushing back, and demonstrating the particular brand of determined recklessness that makes him both infuriating and admirable. Rush Hour 2 introduces an interesting layer of institutional conflict through the arrival of U.S. Secret Service agent Sterling and the subsequent jurisdictional battle between American federal authority and the Hong Kong police force. This conflict is not simply background noise, it directly impacts Lee and Carter's ability to investigate, creates obstacles that force them to work outside official channels, and ultimately becomes part of the mechanism by which the conspiracy against them operates. Sterling represents a kind of institutional arrogance, the assumption that American federal authority supersedes local law enforcement regardless of context or jurisdiction. Lee, as a Hong Kong police officer operating in his own city, finds himself fighting on two fronts simultaneously, against the criminal conspiracy he is trying to unravel and against the American officials who want to take control of the investigation away from him. For Carter, the situation is particularly ironic. He is an American law enforcement officer who finds himself instinctively siding with Lee against his own country's federal agents, because his loyalty to Lee is more fundamental than his loyalty to institutional hierarchy. This jurisdictional tension serves the film's themes beautifully. Rush Hour 2 is, at its core, a film about the bonds that form between individuals cutting across official structures and national boundaries. Lee and Carter's partnership is not sanctioned by any government or police department, it is a product of personal loyalty and mutual respect. The bureaucratic battle between the HKPF and the Secret Service throws that personal loyalty into sharp relief by contrast. While Sterling and the Hong Kong brass argue about authority and protocol, Lee and Carter simply try to find out who is killing people and why. The bombing of Lee's office and the assumed death. Rush Hour 2 introduces an interesting layer of institutional conflict through the arrival of U.S. Secret Service agent Sterling and the subsequent jurisdictional battle between American federal authority and the Hong Kong police force. This conflict is not simply background noise, it directly impacts Lee and Carter's ability to investigate, creates obstacles that force them to work outside official channels, and ultimately becomes part of the mechanism by which the conspiracy against them operates. Sterling represents a kind of institutional arrogance, the assumption that American federal authority supersedes local law enforcement regardless of context or jurisdiction. Lee, as a Hong Kong police officer operating in his own city, finds himself fighting on two fronts simultaneously, against the criminal conspiracy he is trying to unravel and against the American officials who want to take control of the investigation away from him. For Carter, the situation is particularly ironic. He is an American law enforcement officer who finds himself instinctively siding with Lee against his own country's federal agents, because his loyalty to Lee is more fundamental than his loyalty to institutional hierarchy. This jurisdictional tension serves the film's themes beautifully. Rush Hour 2 is, at its core, a film about the bonds that form between individuals cutting across official structures and national boundaries. Lee and Carter's partnership is not sanctioned by any government or police department, it is a product of personal loyalty and mutual respect. The bureaucratic battle between the HKPF and the Secret Service throws that personal loyalty into sharp relief by contrast. While Sterling and the Hong Kong brass argue about authority and protocol, Lee and Carter simply try to find out who is killing people and why. The bombing of Lee's office and the assumed death sanction, driven by their own investigative instincts, and the encounter with Ricky Tan there is complex and morally layered. Tan, when confronted, does not behave like a straightforward villain. Instead, he claims he is being framed by enemies, that he is not responsible for the bombing or the deaths of the customs agents, and that he needs protection rather than arrest. This claim creates genuine uncertainty. Is Ricky Tan telling the truth? Is the man who was once Lee's father's trusted partner actually a victim of circumstance and political maneuvering rather than the architect of a criminal conspiracy? The film is smart enough to sit with this ambiguity for just long enough to make it interesting before resolving it violently and definitively. Lee, Ricky Tan's dangerous and volatile underling, shoots Tan before he can say anything further, before Lee can extract whatever truth framed or whether this was an elaborate performance designed to win Lee's sympathy becomes moot in the moment of his death. Lee's shooting of Tan tells us several crucial things simultaneously. It tells us that Lee is ruthless and operates with lethal autonomy. It tells us that the criminal organization Lee and Carter are dealing with does not tolerate risk, and Ricky Tan talking to the police was an unacceptable risk. And it tells us that the conspiracy is larger and more sophisticated than a single triad boss. There are forces operating above and around Tan that remain to be uncovered after Ricky Tan is killed on the yacht. Agent Sterling holds Lee responsible for the death, a deeply unjust accusation that serves the bureaucratic obstruction theme of the film while also pushing both Lee and Carter out of official structures entirely. Lee is removed from the case by American federal authority, and Carter is ordered to return to Los Angeles. This should, in theory, be the end of their involvement, two law enforcement officers told by their respective superiors to stand down and step away. But Carter, in a moment that demonstrates everything the film has established about who he is and what he values, refuses to simply accept this. He looks at Lee and he sees something that he recognizes and responds to viscerally, a man for whom this case is not an assignment but a deeply personal reckoning. The revelation of Ricky Tan's history with Lee's father, and everything that connects to Lee's father's death, makes clear to Carter that Lee cannot simply walk away from this, and that walking away without pursuing the truth would leave Lee carrying a weight that the investigation might otherwise help him resolve. Carter's decision to convince Lee to come to Los Angeles with him rather than simply leaving is the pivot point of the entire film. It represents Carter choosing, deliberately and with full awareness of the personal cost and professional risk, to stay in the fight alongside his friend. Not because he is ordered to. Not because it is professionally advantageous. But because Lee needs him, because the case matters, and because Carter's loyalty to Lee is stronger than his obedience to institutional authority. This decision carries the film from its Hong Kong first act into its Los Angeles and Las Vegas second and third acts, and it does so on the strength of character and friendship rather than plot mechanics. What the first act of Rush Hour 2 establishes, through all of its comedy and action and conspiracy, is that the true engine of the story is personal rather than procedural. Yes, there is a bomb. Yes, there are dead customs agents. Yes, there is a triad conspiracy and counterfeit currency and international crime. But the reason any of this matters, the reason audiences invest in the story, is because it connects to something private and painful in Lee's life. His father's partnership with Ricky Tan, his father's death, the unanswered questions about what his father knew and who he trusted and what that trust cost him, these are the emotional stakes that make every action sequence and every comedic exchange carry genuine weight. Rush Hour 2 understands something that many action comedies miss, that spectacle without emotional stakes is hollow, and that the best way to make audiences care about fictional danger is to connect it to something recognizably human. Lee's grief for his father, his need to understand what really happened, and Carter's unqualified willingness to stand beside him through that painful process of discovery give the film a heart that its surface entertainment level alone could never provide. The vacation that never really happened turns out to be the best thing that could have occurred, because it is what puts Lee and Carter exactly where they need to be, at exactly the right moment, to begin pursuing a truth that has waited too long to come to light. When Lee and Carter return to Los Angeles following the chaos and tragedy of their Hong Kong experiences, the film enters a new and arguably more narratively sophisticated phase. The move back to American soil is significant for multiple reasons. First, it restores Carter to an environment where he has natural authority, cultural fluency, and street-level knowledge that he lacked entirely in Hong Kong. Second, it places Lee in the position of outsider that Carter occupied throughout the first act, though Lee handles unfamiliar environments with considerably more quiet adaptability than Carter ever manages. Third, and most importantly, it signals that the conspiracy they have been chasing is not a localized Hong Kong criminal matter but something with deep roots in American wealth, American infrastructure, and the particular brand of corruption that hides most effectively behind the gleaming facade of legitimate business success. The transition to Los Angeles is not merely geographical. It represents a tonal and thematic shift in the investigation itself. In Hong Kong, Lee and Carter were dealing with the visible, street-level expressions of criminal power, triad bodyguards, massage parlor confrontations, yacht parties, and the raw physical violence of organized crime. In Los Angeles, they begin to peel back a different and in many ways more insidious layer of the same criminal enterprise, the financial and institutional machinery that launders criminal profit into legitimate wealth and uses the respectability. Their investigation in Los Angeles begins with Stephen Rain, a billionaire hotelier whose connection to the conspiracy Carter identified through observation and instinct during their time on Ricky Tan's yacht in Hong Kong. Carter noticed something specific about Rain, a quality of stillness, of composure, of being entirely too calm in circumstances that should have produced some visible reaction from a genuinely innocent bystander. Carter's instinct about this is articulated through one of the film's most quotable and thematically loaded lines, his observation that behind every major crime there is invariably a wealthy man waiting quietly for his share of the proceeds. This observation is played for comedy, delivered with the particular blend of confidence and absurdity that defines Carter's character throughout the Rush Hour franchise. But beneath the comedic delivery is a genuinely sharp piece of social and criminal analysis, kind of social respectability that deflects official scrutiny. A triad organization operating out of Hong Kong cannot launder $100 million in counterfeit currency through the American financial system without access to American institutions, American real estate, and an American face that the system trusts enough not to look at too closely. Stephen Rain is that face. His billionaire status, his hotel empire, his social prominence, all of these things function not just as personal achievements but as instruments of criminal utility. His very respectability is the mechanism of the crime. This is a genuinely sophisticated observation about how serious financial crime actually operates, and the film deserves credit for embedding it within what presents itself as a mainstream action comedy. Staking out Rain Towers and the discovery of Isabella Molina. The surveillance operation at Rain Towers that Lee and Carter conduct is a masterclass in the film's ability to blend comedy with genuine plot development. Staking out a luxury building in Los Angeles is a very different proposition from the street-level chaos of Hong Kong, and Carter is in his element in a way that he never quite was across the Pacific. He knows this environment. He knows how to read it, how to blend into it, how to observe without being observed, or at least, how to try, which in Carter's case often produces its own comedic results. What they observed during their surveillance is Isabella Molina, a woman Carter encountered aboard Ricky Tan's yacht in Hong Kong, receiving a delivery from Hu Lee, the same dangerous triad enforcer who shot Ricky Tan and has been a threatening presence throughout their investigation. The delivery is suspicious enough on its face, but the superdollar concept is rooted in real criminal history, which gives the film's conspiracy a weight and plausibility that purely fictional schemes often lack. The production of near-perfect counterfeit currency has been a genuine concern for American financial authorities for decades, and the specific challenge of detecting currency sophisticated enough to pass ordinary examination is a real problem with real consequences for financial systems. By grounding its fictional conspiracy in this real-world phenomenon, Rush Hour 2 gives its crime plot a texture and credibility that elevates it beyond the generic. Rain's laundering operation uses his casino as the primary vehicle, a choice that is simultaneously clever and logical within the world of the film. Casinos are environments where large amounts of cash move constantly, where the exchange of currency for chips and back again is so routine and so high volume that introducing counterfeit bills into the flow is far easier than it would be through conventional banking channels. The Red Dragon Casino in Las Vegas, Rain's newest venture, is specifically identified as the mechanism through which the $100 million in superdollars will be washed into the legitimate financial system. Once through the casino's operation, the money emerges clean, untraceable, and effectively real, the counterfeit origin buried under layers of legitimate transaction. Kenny the informant and following the Moneyther investigation's next crucial step takes Lee and Carter to Kenny, a former convict who has rebuilt his life as the operator of a gambling den concealed in the back of his Chinese restaurant and who serves as one of Carter's informants. The Kenny sequence is one of the film's most enjoyable subsidiary character moments, a brief but vivid portrait of the kind of underworld-adjacent figure that effective street-level law enforcement depends upon. Kenny is not a dangerous criminal, but he exists in the spaces between legitimacy and illegality, which means he sees and hears things that law-abiding citizens never would. What Kenny provides is the crucial thread that connects the abstract knowledge of the superdollar scheme to its actual street-level circulation. He has encountered a customer with a suspicious and unusually large quantity of $100 bills, an amount and a pattern that stands out even in an environment where large cash transactions are not unusual. Carter examines the bills and confirms what his investigative instincts suggested. These are Rain's counterfeits, the same superdollars that Molina has been tracking through the Secret Service operation. Following the money from Kenny's gambling den to a bank is the next logical step, and it is here that the investigation takes a violent and dangerous turn. Lee and Carter are captured by Lee and Triad operatives at the bank, an ambush that demonstrates both how closely their movements have been monitored and how seriously the criminal organization takes the threat they represent. The capture is a significant reversal of fortune, moving our protagonists from the position of investigators to the position of prisoners and transporting them in a Triad truck to Las Vegas, inadvertently but decisively confirming the Las v. Lee and Carter's escape from the Triad truck is one of those sequences that Rush Hour 2 executes with particular panache, using the physical comedy of their captive situation, the chemistry between Chan and Tucker, and some genuinely inventive action choreography to create an escape that is both exciting and funny without being implausible within the film's internal logic. The escape is also narratively efficient because it brings them directly to Las Vegas, where the final confrontation with the full machinery of the criminal operation is about to unfold. The Red Dragon Casino is the film's grandest and most visually spectacular setting, and it is used with real dramatic intelligence. Carter's role in the casino sequence is to create a distraction, to be loud, conspicuous, and attention-consuming in ways that only Carter can manage, while Lee uses the cover that distraction provides to slip past security and locate the engraving plates that Molina has identified as the physical heart of the counterfeiting operation. The engraving plates used to print the superdollars are the definitive evidence that would prove Rain's involvement and shut down the entire operation. Securing them is the investigative objective creating that everything has been building toward. Carter is one of the film's most self-aware comedic moments. The film acknowledges, with considerable wit, that Carter's most reliable quality, his inability to not be noticed, his magnetic loudness, his refusal to fade into the background, is actually, in the right circumstances, a tactical asset of enormous value. Everything that makes Carter difficult as a partner in situations requiring subtlety makes him extraordinary in situations requiring attention to be drawn and held. The casino sequence gives him exactly the kind of stage his personality is built for, and Tucker plays it with enormous energy and comic commitment. The grenade, the revelation, and Ricky Tan's return. The sequence that follows Lee locating the engraving plates is one of the most dramatically intense in the film. Lee captures Lee and, in a demonstration of the particular brand of theatrical cruelty that defines her character, tapes a grenade to the inside of his mouth before bringing him before Ricky Tan, who is, shockingly, alive. The revelation that Ricky Tan survived the shooting on the yacht completely reframes what the audience understood about the conspiracy's architecture. Tan was not killed. The shooting was either staged or survived, and either possibility suggests a level of planning and deception that extends far beyond what Lee and Carter had accounted for. This moment of revelation is important not just as a plot twist but as a personal blow to Lee. Everything he thought he understood about what happened on that yacht, about who killed whom and why, is suddenly uncertain again. The man connected to his father's history, the man whose death Lee was held responsible for by Agent Sterling, is standing in front of him alive, which means every consequence that flowed from that apparent death, including Lee being removed from the case, was constructed on false foundations. The grenade taped in Lee's mouth is a brilliant piece of villain cruelty because it simultaneously incapacitates Lee, prevents him from speaking or calling for help, and serves as a symbolic silencing of everything he has been trying to say and prove throughout the entire investigation. It is theatrical and horrible in equal measure, and it gives the film's climax genuine stakes because the threat to Lee's life is specific, immediate, and physically grotesque in a way that abstract danger never quite is. Molina's sacrifice and the race against the grenade. When Ricky Tan departs, leaving Lee in Lee's custody as living evidence of the operation's reach, Molina makes her move. As an undercover Secret Service agent who has been embedded in this operation, Molina attempts to arrest Lee, finally breaking her cover in the service of stopping the immediate threat. Her attempt is both brave and tragic. Lee, who has demonstrated throughout the film that she operates with complete and ruthless efficiency, shoots Molina before she can complete the arrest, removing the undercover agent from the equation with brutal swiftness. Molina's shooting is the film's darkest moment, a reminder that the investigation Lee and Carter have been conducting has real human cost. That the people who fight against organizations like Rain's criminal network take genuine and sometimes fatal risks in service of that fight. It also removes the institutional cover that Molina's Secret Service role provided and makes Lee and Carter's position entirely unofficial and entirely dependent on their own resources and resourcefulness. What follows is the desperate race to remove the grenade from Lee's mouth before Lee can detonate it, a sequence that combines physical comedy with genuine terror in the peculiarly rush hour way, demanding that audiences feel both the absurdity and the real danger of the situation simultaneously. Carter's role in this sequence is quintessentially Carter, improvising under pressure, trusting his instincts, and refusing to let panic paralyze him even when the situation is genuinely paralyzing. The evacuation of the casino that follows is chaotic and spectacular, clearing the ground for the final confrontation that the film has been building toward from its very first scene. The conspiracy fully revealed. By the time the casino is evacuating and the grenade has been neutralized, Rush Hour 2 has assembled all the pieces of its criminal puzzle into a coherent and satisfying whole. What began as a bombing at the U.S. Consulate General in Hong Kong, an event that seemed to be about local triad politics and the murder of American customs agents, has revealed itself to be the surface expression of a vast and sophisticated financial crime. Ricky Tan, the Triad, Lee, and Stephen Rain are all components of a single operation designed to the personal dimension. Lee's father's partnership with Tan, the unanswered questions about how and why his father died, is woven throughout this financial crime in ways that make the investigation simultaneously about justice in the public sense and truth in the private, familial sense. Lee has been chasing not just criminals but answers, not just evidence but understanding, and the Red Dragon Casino is where all of those pursuits converge in a final confrontation that demands everything he and Carter have. The investigation's journey from Hong Kong to Los Angeles to Las Vegas traces the full geography of the conspiracy, from its triad roots, through its American financial infrastructure, to its ultimate expression in the spectacle of a new casino opening built on the foundation of criminal money. And at every stage, it is Lee and Carter together, unofficial, outside-sanctioned channels, operating on loyalty and instinct and the particular alchemy of their partnership, who push the investigation forward when every institutional force around them tries to shut it down. The final act of Rush Hour 2 represents the convergence of every narrative thread the film has been carefully weaving since its opening moments in Hong Kong. The casino evacuation following the grenade incident clears the playing field for what has always been the film's true destination, not merely the resolution of a criminal conspiracy involving counterfeit superdollars, but the personal reckoning that Lee has been moving toward ever since the name Ricky Tan first surfaced in the investigation. Every civilian population and transformed into an arena for final confrontations is where Rush Hour 2 pays off every promise it has made. Ricky Tan's admission that he killed Lee's father is the emotional center of the entire film. Everything else, the superdollars, the casino, the jurisdictional battles, the journey from Hong Kong to Los Angeles to Las Vegas, has been scaffolding around this single terrible truth. Lee's father was killed not by a stranger, not by a random criminal act, not by the impersonal violence of organized crime. He was killed by his partner. By someone he trusted. By someone who stood beside him in the same work and chose, at some point and for some reason, to betray that trust in the most final and irreversible way possible. The weight of this admission on Lee cannot be overstated. Throughout the film, Lee has been carrying the emotional burden of investigating someone connected to his father while not knowing what the full truth was. There has been ambiguity. Was Tan involved in the bombing? Was he genuinely framed as he claimed on the yacht? Was his relationship with Lee's father complicated in ways that defied simple categorization? All of that ambiguity is resolved in a single moment of admission, and the resolution is the worst possible one. There is no nuance here, no comforting complexity that might soften the reality. Ricky Tan killed Lee's father. The man his father trusted and worked alongside chose to murder him. What Tan's motivation was, whether it was greed, self-preservation, the law of triad power and criminal profit, or some combination of all these things, the film leaves somewhat open, and that openness is dramatically appropriate. The specific motivation matters less than the fact of the betrayal. Lee's father died because someone he trusted decided his life was worth less than whatever Tan stood to gain from his death. That is the truth Lee has been chasing, and it is both the answer he needed and the answer he least wanted. The accidental justice of Ricky Tan's death. The physical confrontation that follows Tan's admission is handled with real dramatic intelligence. Lee does not execute Tan in a cold and premeditated way that would make Lee a killer rather than a police officer, and it would compromise the moral clarity that defines his character throughout the franchise. Instead, in the chaos of the fight, Lee accidentally kicks Ricky Tan out of a window. Tan falls to his death, and with him falls the last living architect of the conspiracy that killed Lee's father. The accidental nature of Tan's death is one of the film's most thoughtful choices. It allows Lee to achieve justice, genuine, final, irreversible justice, without crossing the line into deliberate killing. Lee did not plan to kill Tan. He did not decide in a moment of rage or grief to throw him from the window. It happened in the chaos of a fight, in the instinctive physical language that Lee speaks fluently, and the result is Tan's death. Lee is avenged but not corrupted. He gets the closure he needed without becoming the kind of person who would make his father, the police officer, the man of law and principle, ashamed. There is also something poetically appropriate about the manner of Tan's death. He does not get a dramatic final speech or a villain's grand exit. He falls out of a window in the middle of a fight, the prosaic violence of his death matching the essential smallness of his betrayal, a man who killed his partner for profit and power, brought down not by elaborate justice but by the physical consequences of the confrontation his own choices made inevitable. The window through which he falls is the window of his own criminal architecture, the penthouse of the casino he helped build with counterfeit money and murder, and he exits through it without ceremony or dignity. For Lee, this moment is simultaneously the resolution of the film's emotional arc and a complicated kind of grief. He has been avenged. His father has been avenged. The truth is known. But the truth is also that his father is still dead, that nothing changes that, and that justice, however complete, is not the same as restoration. Lee gets closure, not healing. He gets truth, not his father back. The film is wise enough not to pretend these are the same thing, and Chan plays the aftermath with the quiet, restrained emotional intelligence that has always been the unexpected depth beneath his physical virtuosity. Carter's role in the climax and the partnership's final expression. Carter's presence throughout the final confrontation is not incidental. He is there, as he has been throughout the entire investigation, not because institutional authority placed him there but because he chose to be. His decision back in Hong Kong to bring Lee to Los Angeles rather than simply returning alone, to recognize that this case was personal for Lee and that personal cases require the presence of people who care about you rather than just professional support, is what puts Carter in that penthouse. At that moment, when Lee needs him, Carter does not defeat Ricky Tan. He does not deliver the justice that resolves Lee's father's story. But his presence is part of what makes it possible for Lee to get to that moment of confrontation. Every distraction Carter ran, every fight he stumbled through, every moment of chaos he generated that gave Lee the space to move and investigate, all of it was in service of getting them both to this point. The Rush Hour partnership is never about one person carrying the other. It is about two people with completely different capabilities and completely different personalities creating something together that neither could create alone. Lee's final act and the escape. Just when the confrontation with Tan seems to have resolved the film's central conflicts, Lee delivers one final, devastating statement of criminal commitment. Having survived Carter's accidental defeat of her on the casino floor, she enters the penthouse with a time bomb, choosing, in the face of the operation's complete collapse, to die in an act of destruction rather than surrender to the legal consequences of everything she has done. Lee's decision to detonate a bomb and die in the explosion is the ultimate expression of her character as it has been established throughout the film, absolute, committed, and entirely without the self-preserving pragmatism that motivates most criminal actors. She is not dying for Ricky Tan, who is already dead. She is not dying for the operation, which is already destroyed. She is dying as a statement, an act of will in the face of defeat, and her death takes the decision about her fate entirely out of Lee and Carter's hands in the same way that Tan's death was taken from Lee's deliberate intention. The bomb forces Lee and Carter into an improvised escape, a makeshift zip line that carries them out of the penthouse and away from the explosion in a sequence that is both spectacularly entertaining and emblematic of everything Rush Hour 2 does best. There is no careful preparation, no pre-planned escape route, no evidence that either of them thought this through beyond the immediate imperative of not being in the building when Lee's bomb goes off. They improvise, they commit, and they survive, not because they are the most skilled or the most prepared, but because they are resourceful under pressure and because they do it together. Justice achieved, truth uncovered, and the cost of closure. Rush Hour 2's climax achieves something genuinely rare in mainstream action comedy. It delivers full genre satisfaction in terms of action, humor, and spectacle while simultaneously honoring the emotional stakes it spent the entire film building. Lee gets the truth about his father. He gets justice, however imperfect in its delivery. He gets closure, however complicated in its emotional texture. Carter gets to be the partner Lee needed him to be, not the hero of the story, but the person without whom the hero could not have gotten to the story's end. The deaths of Ricky Tan, Stephen Rain, and Lee eliminate the entire criminal leadership of the Superdollar operation, secure the engraving plates that were the physical heart of the counterfeiting scheme, and leave the Red Dragon Casino, built on criminal money and criminal partnership, without its architects. The explosion that kills Lee is the final punctuation mark on the conspiracy's destruction, as dramatic and total as anything the villains themselves could have planned. What Rush Hour 2 understands, and what its climax demonstrates with considerable emotional intelligence, is that the resolution of action plots is only as satisfying as the personal journeys that run alongside them. Lee's father deserved justice. Lee deserved truth. The film gives them both, and in doing so it transforms what could have been a purely entertaining but emotionally hollow sequel into something with genuine resonance, a story about a son who loved his father, a friend who refused to let that son face his reckoning alone, and the particular, complicated, imperfect justice that the real world sometimes delivers to those who refuse to stop pursuing it. You said. There is something deeply satisfying about the way Rush Hour 2 chooses to close its story. After the extraordinary violence and chaos of the Red Dragon Casino, the grenade, the penthouse confrontation, Ricky Tan's death, Lee's explosion, the zip-line escape, the film brings its characters to one of the most mundane and recognizable settings imaginable, an airport. McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas is not a glamorous location. It is not a penthouse or a yacht or a Hong Kong massage parlor or a luxury casino. It is a place of transitions, of departures and arrivals, of people moving from one chapter of their lives to another. And it is precisely the right setting for what Rush Hour 2 needs to accomplish in its final minutes, because what remains to be done is not action but emotion, not spectacle but meaning. The choice of an airport as the location for the film's emotional resolution is quietly brilliant. Airports exist in a kind of suspended reality, outside the normal flow of daily life, where the usual rules and obligations feel temporarily distant. People waiting in airports have a quality of openness that they rarely possess in their ordinary environments. They are between things, between cities, between responsibilities, between versions of themselves. For Lee and Carter, standing in McCarran Airport after everything they have survived and uncovered and resolved, that sense of being between things is exactly right. They are between the investigation that has just concluded and whatever comes next, and the film uses that in-between quality to create the space for its most emotionally significant exchange. Sterling and Molina, institutional acknowledgement of unofficial heroes. The appearance of Agent Sterling and Isabella Molina at the airport to thank Lee represents one of the film's most satisfying reversals of the institutional dynamics that complicated the investigation throughout. Sterling, who earlier held Lee responsible for Ricky Tan's apparent death on the yacht and used that accusation to remove Lee from the case, now stands before him offering gratitude for the very work he tried to prevent Lee from doing. This reversal is not played with heavy irony or dramatic confrontation. The film does not belabor the hypocrisy of an official who obstructed an investigation now thanking the investigator for successfully completing it. It simply acknowledges, quietly and without fanfare, that Lee was right and Sterling was wrong, and that the case was solved not through institutional channels but through the personal commitment and loyalty of two men who refused to be told to stand down. Sterling's thanks are the institutional world catching up to what Lee and Carter already knew, that the investigation mattered, that the truth was worth pursuing regardless of jurisdictional politics, and that sometimes the people best positioned to solve a case are the ones that official structures are most eager to sideline. The Secret Service acknowledging Lee's contribution is a form of vindication that the film has earned through everything that came before it, and it lands with appropriate weight without being oversold. Molina's kiss is a different kind of acknowledgement entirely. Where Sterling's thanks are professional and institutional, Molina's kiss is personal and warm, a recognition not of Lee's official contribution to the case but of who he is as a person and a partner in the deepest sense of that word. Molina has seen Lee at his most vulnerable, with a grenade taped in his mouth, facing the man who killed his father, navigating the most personally painful investigation of his career. The kiss is brief but genuinely felt, a moment of human warmth in a film that has balanced its action and comedy with surprising emotional intelligence throughout. It also gives Lee a moment of uncomplicated happiness before the film's most emotionally significant scene, which serves as a tonal preparation, a breath of lightness before the weight of what comes next. The moment when Lee gives Carter his late father's police badge is the emotional summit of Rush Hour 2. Everything the film has built, every scene in Hong Kong, every step of the investigation in Los Angeles, every confrontation in Las Vegas, every moment of personal revelation and painful truth, has been leading to this single gesture. It is quiet, understated, and completely devastating in the best possible way. A badge changing hands between two friends in an airport is not spectacular by the standards of the action sequences that preceded it. But it is the most important thing that happens in the entire film. To understand the full weight of this moment, it is necessary to understand what Lee's father's badge represents within the emotional logic of Rush Hour 2. Lee's father was a police officer, a man who dedicated his life to law, to order, to the protection of the innocent and the pursuit of the guilty. His badge was the physical symbol of that dedication, the object that made his commitment tangible and official. When Lee's father died, killed, as the film ultimately reveals, by his own partner Ricky Tan, that badge became something more than a professional credential. It became a relic, a piece of a man who was taken too soon by someone who should have protected him, a physical connection to a grief that Lee has been carrying through the entire film. Carrying his father's badge throughout the investigation has been Lee's way of keeping his father present in the work, of making the investigation not just a professional obligation but a continuation of his father's own commitment to justice. The badge is the connection between the living son and the dead father, between the present investigation and the past betrayal, between what was lost and what Lee has spent the film trying to recover. It is the most personal object Lee possesses, and the fact that he chooses to give it to Carter is an act of such profound trust and love that it requires a moment to fully absorb. Why does Lee give the badge to Carter? Because Carter is the person who made it possible for Lee to get to the truth. Not institutionally, not professionally, but personally. Carter chose to stay when he could have left. Carter followed Lee into danger that had nothing to do with his jurisdiction or his job description because he recognized that Lee needed him. Carter sat with the weight of Lee's personal pain without fully understanding it and without trying to minimize it, simply remaining present and committed because that is what friends do for each other. The badge is Lee's way of saying all of that, of expressing, in the particular wordless language of a meaningful object, that Carter's friendship has been worth more than any professional partnership could have been, and that what they have together is real in a way that transcends the circumstances that created it. For Carter, receiving the badge is a moment of genuine solemnity that the film handles with real delicacy. Carter, who is almost constitutionally incapable of taking anything seriously for more than a few consecutive seconds, receives this gift with the quiet gravity it deserves. He understands what he is being given, not just the object but the meaning behind it. He understands that Lee is offering him something irreplaceable, something that represents the most painful and most important chapter of Lee's life, and he receives it with the respect and emotional intelligence that the moment demands. This is Carter at his best, stripped of the bravado and the noise and the performance, simply present with his friend in a moment of genuine emotional significance. The badge also represents closure in the most complete sense. Lee has found the truth about his father's death. He has confronted the man responsible. Justice has been delivered, however imperfect in its form. The questions that haunted him have been answered. And now, giving the badge to Carter is a way of releasing it, of acknowledging that the chapter is closed, that the grief has been honored, that his father's memory has been served, and that it is time to let the physical symbol of that grief pass into the keeping of the person who helped make closure possible. It is not a rejection of his father's memory but a completion of it. Lee has done what needed to be done, and the badge can now mean something new, a bond between two friends rather than a wound in one man's heart. Carter's casino winnings, comedy as emotional release. The film, which is too wise to end on pure solemnity, uses Carter's revelation about his casino winnings to pivot from emotional weight to celebratory lightness with the perfect comic timing that has defined the Rush Hour franchise from its beginning. Just as Lee and Carter are preparing to go their separate ways, Lee presumably returning to Hong Kong, Carter returning to Los Angeles, the natural conclusion of a partnership that exists outside their ordinary lives, Carter reveals that he won a significant amount of money at Caesar's Palace during the chaos of the Las Vegas sequence. This revelation is classically Carter. In the middle of an international criminal investigation involving bombs, murders, counterfeit currency, triad assassins, and personal revelations of devastating emotional weight, Carter found time to gamble at a casino and win big. The sheer audacity of this, the fact that Carter somehow managed to turn a moment of extreme professional and personal danger into a personal financial windfall, is so perfectly in character that it functions as a comedic summary of everything Carter is and has been throughout the film. He is the person who finds the angle, who spots the opportunity, who manages to come out ahead even in circumstances that would simply overwhelm anyone else. The casino winnings also serve a crucial narrative function beyond the comedy. They are the mechanism that keeps Lee and Carter together beyond the natural conclusion of the case. Without a shared destination, without a new investigation, the two friends would logically separate and return to their respective lives. Carter's winnings give them a reason, a joyful, uncomplicated, entirely self-indulgent reason, to stay together a little longer. They do not need to go to New York. There is no professional obligation pulling them there, no case to solve, no criminal to chase. They go simply because they want to, because they enjoy each other's company, because the money makes it possible, and because the alternative, separating after everything they have been through together, feels premature and wrong. New York City and the victory dance, pure joy as the film's final statement. The decision to send Lee and Carter to New York City for the film's closing sequence, where they perform a victory dance to Michael Jackson's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, is one of the most purely joyful endings in the Rush Hour franchise. It is not a complicated ending. It does not attempt to add new dramatic dimensions or set up future adventures in ways that undercut the completeness of the story just told. It is simply two friends, flush with success and survival and genuine happiness, dancing together in one of the world's great cities because they feel like it and because they can. The choice of Michael Jackson's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough as the soundtrack for this final sequence is inspired. The song is infectious, celebratory, and completely irresistible, a piece of music that demands physical response, that makes stillness feel actively wrong. It is also a song with a quality of timelessness that transcends any specific cultural moment, which makes it the perfect choice for a friendship that itself transcends cultural boundaries. Lee and Carter dancing together to Michael Jackson in New York City is the film's final and most complete expression of its central theme, that joy, like friendship, belongs to everyone regardless of where they come from or how different they are from each other. The victory dance is also specifically and deliberately uncool in a way that is somehow cooler than anything conventionally cool could manage. Lee and Carter are not performing for anyone. They are not trying to impress. They are simply expressing happiness in the most direct and unfiltered way available to them, through music and movement and the shared physical language of people who are genuinely glad to be alive and together. There is something extraordinarily winning about watching two law enforcement officers who have just survived bombings and triad assassins and grenades taped to people's faces simply dancing in a city because the music is good and the moment is right. The cast that made it all possible. The emotional power of Rush Hour 2's ending is entirely dependent on the extraordinary performances delivered by its principal cast throughout the film. Jackie Chan as Chief Inspector Lee brings to the role something that goes beyond his legendary physical virtuosity, a quality of quiet emotional depth that makes Lee's personal journey genuinely moving rather than simply functional. Chan has always been underestimated as a dramatic performer because his physical gifts are so extraordinary that they tend to dominate any assessment of his work. But Rush Hour 2's ending demonstrates clearly that Chan can carry emotional weight with the same precision and control he brings to action choreography. His Lee in the airport scenes is a man who has been through something genuinely profound and arrived on the other side changed but intact, and Chan communicates that transformation with remarkable subtlety. Chris Tucker as Detective James Carter delivers what may be the most complete performance of his career in Rush Hour 2. Tucker's Carter is a character who could easily have remained purely comic, the loud, self-involved foil to Chan's dignified straight man, but Tucker consistently finds the genuine humanity beneath the performance Carter puts on for the world. The airport scene, where Carter receives the badge and responds with real emotional intelligence, is proof that Tucker's gifts go far deeper than comedic timing, though his comedic timing is itself extraordinary. Carter's arc across the film, from a man on vacation who wants nothing to do with another investigation to a friend who chooses loyalty over self-interest repeatedly and at genuine personal risk, is made believable entirely through Tucker's commitment to the character's emotional truth. Jong Zi as Hu Lee brings a quality of controlled menace to the film's primary antagonist that elevates every scene she appears in. Hu Lee is terrifying not because she is theatrical about her violence but because she is so matter-of-fact about it, a person for whom extreme acts have become entirely routine. Zi, one of the most gifted performers of her generation, communicates that quality with an economy of expression that makes Hu Lee genuinely frightening in a way that more overtly dramatic villain performances rarely achieve. Roselyn Sánchez as Isabella Molina provides the film with a female character who is neither purely decorative nor simply functional. Molina is a skilled professional doing genuinely dangerous work, and her willingness to take personal risks in service of the investigation, including the moment when she attempts to arrest Hu Lee despite knowing the danger, gives her genuine heroic dimension. Her kiss with Lee is earned rather than gratuitous because the film has taken the time to establish Molina as a person worthy of Lee's respect and genuine admiration. John Lone as Ricky Tan is a study in the particular kind of villainy that is most disturbing because it wears a human face. Tan is not a monster. He is a man who made choices that led to murder and betrayal and the construction of an elaborate criminal empire, but choices that emerge from recognizable human motivations rather than pure malevolence. Lone plays him with a quality of damaged dignity that makes his final scene, and his admission of what he did to Lee's father, land with the full weight of genuine tragedy rather than simple villain defeat. The ending of Rush Hour 2, Sterling's thanks, Molina's kiss, the badge, the casino winnings, the flight to New York, the victory dance, is the film's final and most complete argument for the value of the partnership at its center. Everything that Lee and Carter went through together. from Hong Kong to Los Angeles to Las Vegas, was in service of two things simultaneously: solving a criminal conspiracy and completing a personal journey. Both objectives have been achieved. The conspiracy is dismantled. The personal truth has been uncovered. Justice, imperfect but real, has been delivered. And through it all, the friendship between Lee and Carter has not merely survived but deepened, proven, and arrived at the airport in Las Vegas as something richer and more substantial than what it was when they landed in Hong Kong at the film's beginning. The victory dance is not a trivial conclusion. It is a statement. After everything, the grief and the danger and the betrayal and the investigation and the confrontation and the loss, this is what remains. Two friends, dancing, alive, together. The film argues, with the unironic sincerity that good entertainment has always been capable of, that this is enough. That joy earned through genuine hardship and genuine loyalty is the most valuable thing available to human beings, and that the partnerships we choose, across every difference of culture and personality and background, are what make that joy possible. One of the most frequently overlooked aspects of what makes Rush Hour 2 work as well as it does is the quality and depth of its supporting cast. It is entirely understandable that Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker dominate any conversation about the film. Their partnership is the engine of the franchise, the reason audiences showed up in such enormous numbers, and the creative center around which everything else orbits. But a film is only as strong as the world it builds around its central characters, and Rush Hour 2 builds that world with considerable care and intelligence, populating it with performers who bring genuine craft, presence, and often surprising depth to roles that lesser productions would have treated as mere functional placeholders. The supporting characters of Rush Hour 2 serve multiple purposes simultaneously. They create the obstacles that test Lee and Carter's partnership. They embody the various institutional, criminal, and personal forces that shape the investigation. They provide comedy, danger, warmth, and moral complexity in precise proportions calibrated to serve the larger story. And in several cases, they are played by performers of such exceptional talent that their contributions to the film exceed what their screen time alone would suggest possible. Understanding the supporting cast of Rush Hour 2 is understanding the full texture of the film, the depth that exists beneath and around the central relationship, giving it context, contrast, and consequence. Alan King as Stephen Rain, the respectable face of criminal enterprise. Alan King's performance as Stephen Rain is one of the film's most underappreciated contributions. King was, by the time of Rush Hour 2, a legendary figure in American entertainment, a comedian and actor of enormous experience and natural authority whose career stretched back decades through stand-up comedy, film, and television. Casting him as Stephen Rain was a choice of real intelligence, because King brings to the role exactly what the character requires, a quality of genuine establishment respectability that makes the corruption beneath it feel genuinely insidious rather than cartoonishly obvious. Stephen Rain is not a villain who looks like a villain. He is a billionaire Los Angeles hotelier, a man who exists at the highest levels of legitimate American business and social life, whose wealth and prominence give him access to institutions and individuals that would be entirely closed to someone with a more obviously criminal profile. This is the specific kind of corruption that Rush Hour 2 is most interested in exploring, the kind that hides in plain sight behind charitable donations and luxury hotels and the social grace of a man who has spent decades learning how to be impeccably presentable. King plays Rain with a quality of smooth, unhurried confidence that never tips over into obvious menace. He is charming in the scenes where charm is what Rain needs, businesslike in the scenes where business is what is required, and only in the film's final moments, when the operation is collapsing around him and Ricky Tan has cornered him in the penthouse, does the mask slip to reveal the genuine ugliness beneath. This restraint is dramatically valuable because it makes Rain more believable as a real-world type of criminal, the kind who functions precisely because he never looks criminal, and more chilling when the reality of what he has been doing is fully revealed. Rain's role in the superdollar scheme, providing the casino infrastructure through which $100 million in counterfeit currency would be laundered into the legitimate financial system, is the kind of criminal contribution that requires exactly the kind of person King portrays. It requires someone the financial system trusts, someone whose business operations are large and complex enough that the introduction of counterfeit money can be hidden within the normal flow of transaction, someone whose social prominence provides a buffer of respectability that deflects scrutiny. King embodies all of this with the ease of a performer who has spent a lifetime understanding how authority and social confidence work and how they can be deployed. Harris Yulin as Special Agent Sterling, institutional obstruction personified. Harris Yulin's portrayal of Special Agent in Charge Sterling is a masterclass in playing the particular kind of bureaucratic antagonist that action films need but rarely execute with real sophistication. Sterling is not a villain in the conventional sense. He is not corrupt, not personally malicious, not motivated by greed or power hunger in the way that Rain and Tan are. He is something in some ways more frustrating, a man who is genuinely committed to institutional authority and genuinely incapable of recognizing when that commitment serves the criminals he is supposed to be fighting rather than the justice he believes he is upholding. Yulin, a character actor of exceptional range who has spent decades playing figures of authority across film and television, brings to Sterling a quality of implacable institutional certainty that makes the character both maddening and comprehensible. Sterling genuinely believes he is right. He genuinely believes that proper jurisdictional procedure, proper chain of command, proper institutional protocol are the foundations of effective law enforcement rather than obstacles to it. His decision to remove Lee from the investigation after Ricky Tan's apparent death on the yacht is, from Sterling's perspective, entirely correct, a response to perceived incompetence in a high-profile case that has attracted federal attention. What Sterling cannot see, and what the film uses his blindness to illustrate, is that institutional correctness is not the same as investigative effectiveness, and that the rigid application of procedural authority can actively protect criminal operations by removing the people most motivated and most capable of exposing them. Every time Sterling obstructs Lee and Carter, he is inadvertently doing Rain and Tan's work for them. His antagonism toward Lee is not malicious but it is consequential, and the film is sophisticated enough to present it as a genuine systemic problem rather than simply a character flaw in one difficult official. The moment at McCarran Airport when Sterling thanks Lee for his work on the case is, in light of everything that came before it, a quietly significant moment of institutional self-correction. Sterling is capable of recognizing, after the fact, that Lee's approach yielded results that his own approach would not have. Whether that recognition produces any lasting change in how Sterling operates is the film's business. The important thing is that the acknowledgement happens, and that Yulin plays it with the slightly uncomfortable quality of a man who is doing the right thing in a situation where doing the right thing requires admitting he was wrong. Kenneth Zhang as Captain Chin, institutional authority in Hong Kong. Kenneth Zhang brings considerable screen presence to the role of Captain Chin, Lee's superior in the Hong Kong police force. Zhang is one of Hong Kong cinema's most respected character actors, with a career spanning decades and an ability to command scenes through sheer authority of presence. Captain Chin represents the Hong Kong institutional counterpart to Sterling, the local embodiment of official authority that exists in tension with Lee's more personal and more flexible approach to investigation. The jurisdictional battle between Chin's Hong Kong police force and Sterling's American federal operation is one of the film's most interesting background dramas, and Zhang gives Chin enough dignity and intelligence that the character never becomes a simple obstacle. Chin has legitimate concerns about American federal authority operating on Hong Kong soil, legitimate professional reasons for wanting to control how the investigation proceeds, and a genuine relationship with Lee that is more complex than simple superior-subordinate hierarchy. His interactions with Lee carry the weight of institutional history and personal history simultaneously, and Zhang navigates that complexity with the efficiency of a performer who understands how to communicate depth in limited screen time. Don Cheadle as Kenny, the uncredited scene stealer. Don Cheadle's uncredited appearance as Kenny, Carter's informant who runs an illegal gambling den in the back of his Chinese restaurant in Los Angeles, is one of Rush Hour 2's most delightful surprises, and the decision to cast someone of Cheadle's caliber in what is essentially a brief supporting role says something important about the film's approach to its ensemble. By 2001, Don Cheadle was an enormously respected actor whose work in films like Devil in a Blue Dress and Traffic had established him as one of the most gifted performers of his generation. He did not need to take a small role in an action comedy sequel. The fact that he did, and the quality he brings to it, speaks to the particular pleasure of the Rush Hour franchise and to the collegial spirit that seems to have surrounded the production. Kenny is a character defined by the specific texture of his social position, a man who has been on the wrong side of the law, who has rebuilt something legitimate in the form of a restaurant, but who has not entirely separated himself from the world of illegal activity that the gambling den represents. He is Carter's informant, which means he occupies that ambiguous middle ground between the criminal world and law enforcement, providing information in exchange for the kind of informal protection and tolerance that Carter can offer someone like him. Cheadle plays Kenny with a wonderful quality of street-level authenticity, the particular kind of wary, calculating intelligence that someone in Kenny's position needs to survive. He is not naive about the world he inhabits. He knows exactly what Carter wants from him, and he knows what that relationship costs and what it provides. His information about the customer with the suspicious amount of $100 bills is delivered with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who has been doing this long enough to understand exactly how valuable this kind of intelligence is and exactly how to present it. Cheadle's naturalistic performance style makes Kenny feel like a real person rather than a functional plot device, which is an achievement in a scene that exists primarily to move the investigation forward. The uncredited nature of Cheadle's appearance adds a particular quality of pleasant surprise to the role. Audiences familiar with his work would recognize him immediately and experience the specific delight of an unexpected cameo from someone they admire. Audiences unfamiliar with his wider work would simply experience Kenny as a vivid, believable character who makes an impression disproportionate to his screen time. Either way, the effect is the same, a brief appearance that enriches the film's world considerably. Maggie Q and the flirtation that goes nowhere. Maggie Q's appearance as the young woman Carter unsuccessfully attempts to flirt with is a small but characteristic moment in the film's comedy architecture. Maggie Q, who would go on to a significant career in action film and television, brings to this brief role exactly the quality it requires, a composed, entirely unimpressed response to Carter's advances that deflates his considerable social confidence without malice or drama. The joke is simple and effective. Carter, who presents himself as irresistible to women and carries himself with the confidence of a man who has never seriously questioned his own appeal, meets someone who simply does not find him interesting, and responds to his attempts at charm with the polite but unmistakable indifference of someone with better things to do. This kind of moment is important to a film like Rush Hour 2 because it maintains the character consistency that makes Carter both funny and believable. Carter's self-image is enormous, but the film is careful not to simply validate it. He is charming and funny and loyal and brave, but he is also occasionally ridiculous, and the moments where his self-regard runs ahead of his actual appeal are part of what makes him human rather than simply a comedic archetype. Maggie Q's composed rejection is one of those moments, delivered with perfect economy. Ernie Reyes Jr. as Zing, physical comedy and martial arts skill. Ernie Reyes Jr. brings a specific and valuable kind of energy to his role as Zing in Rush Hour 2. Reyes is a trained martial artist of considerable skill whose physical capabilities allow the film to include an action sequence, the fight involving Zing, that operates at a level of physical sophistication matched only by Jackie Chan's own sequences. In a film built significantly around the spectacle of skilled physical performance, having a supporting player who can credibly operate at that level is enormously valuable. Zing is a bodyguard type, a physically formidable presence deployed to protect criminal interests and obstruct Lee and Carter's investigation. But what makes the character memorable is the way Reyes brings genuine athletic artistry to the role, creating an opponent who challenges Lee in a way that feels real rather than staged. The fight sequences involving Zing have an energy and credibility that comes from the fact that Reyes is not simply performing choreography but actually engaging with it as someone who understands martial arts from the inside. This authentic physical engagement elevates the sequence considerably and gives it a quality of genuine contest that more conventional action choreography often lacks. Jeremy Piven, Saul Rubinek, Joel Kinnan Miller, and Johnny Russo, the texture of the world. The cameo appearances by Jeremy Piven as a Versace salesman, Saul Rubinek as a casino box man, Joel McKinnon Miller as Tex, and Gianni Russo as a pit boss collectively perform the crucial function of giving the film's world texture and specificity. These are not characters with significant narrative function, they exist at the margins of the story, populating the environments through which Lee and Carter move with faces and personalities that make those environments feel real and inhabited rather than simply constructed as backdrops. Jeremy Piven brings his characteristic quality of barely contained energy to the Versace salesman role, a brief appearance that captures perfectly the particular social type of the luxury goods salesman, someone who deploys enthusiasm and flattery as professional tools while maintaining an internal calculation about exactly how much commission is on the table. Saul Rubinek as the casino box man uses his considerable character actor gifts to suggest an entire life in the casino business in a handful of lines and gestures. Gianni Russo as the pit boss draws on genuine personal history. Russo has real connections to both the entertainment industry and the world the pit boss character inhabits, to create a brief but vivid impression. These cameo appearances represent a particular kind of casting philosophy that values quality over quantity, the recognition that brief appearances by skilled performers add more to a film's texture than extended appearances by less capable ones. Rush Hour 2's producers and director Brett Ratner understood that the world Lee and Carter inhabit needed to feel genuinely populated, and they populated it with people who knew how to make an impression quickly and efficiently. What the ensemble reveals about Rush Hour 2's ambitions. Taken together, the supporting cast of Rush Hour 2 reveals a film with more ambition and more craft than its blockbuster action comedy surface suggests. The decision to surround Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker with performers of the caliber of Don Cheadle, Alan King, Harris Yulin, and Kenneth Zhang reflects a production that took its world-building seriously, that understood the central partnership would only be as compelling as the world it was embedded in, and that great supporting performances are not luxuries but necessities. Every character in this ensemble serves the film's central story, the story of Lee and Carter's friendship, of Lee's search for truth about his father, of a criminal conspiracy that reaches from Hong Kong to Las Vegas, while simultaneously existing as a fully realized presence in their own right. They are not simply props arranged around the central characters but people with their own logic, their own motivations, their own specific texture. And the performances that bring them to life, from Cheadle's naturalistic Kenny to King's smooth and dangerous Rain to Yulin's institutionally certain Sterling, are what make Rush Hour 2 a film worth watching multiple times, because the richness of its ensemble rewards the kind of attention that initial viewings, dazzled by Chan's physicality and Tucker's comedy, may not have fully paid. When Brett Ratner began assembling the creative team for Rush Hour 2, one of the most consequential decisions he made was to bring back Lalo Schifrin to compose the film's score. This was not simply a matter of franchise continuity, of maintaining a recognizable sonic identity across two films to signal to audiences that they were in familiar territory. It was a recognition that Schifrin's contribution to the original Rush Hour had been genuinely significant, that his understanding of how music functions within action comedy was sophisticated and rare, and that the particular kind of film Ratner wanted Rush Hour 2 to be would require a composer of exceptional breadth and ambition. Lalo Schifrin is one of the most remarkable figures in the history of film music. Born in Buenos Aires in 1932, trained as a classical pianist and composer, shaped by both European classical tradition and the jazz world, he inhabited so fluently that he became Dizzy Gillespie's pianist and arranger in the early 1960s. Schifrin arrived in Hollywood with a musical vocabulary of extraordinary range. His work across decades of film and television, from the iconic Mission: Impossible theme to his scores for Bullet, Dirty Harry, Enter the Dragon, and countless others, demonstrated a composer who could move between musical worlds with complete fluency, equally at home with jazz-inflected rhythmic drive, orchestral grandeur, intimate chamber textures, and the specific demands of action, suspense, and comedy. By the time Rush Hour 2 came along in 2001, Schifrin was approaching 70 years old and had accumulated one of the most impressive bodies of work in the history of film scoring. His return for the sequel was therefore not just the return of a familiar voice but the return of a genuinely legendary one, a composer whose experience, craft, and musical intelligence were of a caliber that very few Hollywood productions could claim. The brief reprise and the bold departure. Schifrin was explicit and unapologetic about the relationship between his Rush Hour 2 score and his work on the original film. He acknowledged that the first 20 to 30 seconds of the main title constituted a reprise of Rush Hour's musical identity, a gesture of continuity, a nod to the audience that they were returning to a world they had visited before, a brief moment of sonic familiarity before the new film established its own musical personality. But beyond that brief opening reprise, Schifrin made a decisive break. The music for Rush Hour 2, he insisted, was completely different from the music for Rush Hour, and that difference was not accidental or incidental but the result of deliberate artistic choice in response to specific creative direction from the director. This willingness to depart from what had worked before, to resist the temptation of simply recycling a successful sonic formula, is itself a mark of genuine artistic confidence and integrity. Many film sequels take the path of least resistance with their music, essentially repackaging the score of the original with minor variations and different instrumentation. The audience recognizes the sound, the association with the first film generates positive feeling, and nobody has to do the difficult work of building something new. Schifrin and Ratner rejected this approach entirely, and the result is a score that stands on its own as a complete and independent artistic statement rather than simply an echo of what came before. Brett Ratner's request, a symphonic score. The creative direction that shaped Rush Hour 2's score came directly from Brett Ratner's request for a symphonic score, a term that carries specific and significant musical implications. A symphonic score, in the context of film music, means a score that draws primarily on the resources of the full symphony orchestra, that thinks in terms of orchestral color and texture and development rather than rhythmic grooves or electronic production, and that approaches the film with the architectural ambition of classical composition rather than the more immediately visceral tools of contemporary film scoring. This request was, in several ways, a surprising one for a buddy cop action comedy. The conventions of the genre in 2001 leaned heavily toward rhythm-driven scores, music built around beats, electronic textures, hip-hop influences, and the kind of propulsive rhythmic energy that feels native to urban action filmmaking. The Rush Hour franchise, with its explicit connections to hip-hop culture through Chris Tucker's Carter character and the musical sensibilities embedded in the film's DNA, might have seemed to call for exactly this kind of scoring approach. A symphonic score, with its associations with classical grandeur and European musical tradition, might have seemed like a strange fit for a film built around a Chinese-American buddy cop partnership navigating Hong Kong and Las Vegas. But Ratner's instinct was more sophisticated than simple genre convention, and Schifrin's response to the request reveals the depth of his understanding of what the score needed to accomplish. The director recognized, as Schifrin recognized, that the comedy in Rush Hour 2 was primarily a function of the actors and their performances, of Chan's physical virtuosity and Tucker's improvisational genius, and that musical comedy would not add to this but dilute it. What the score needed to support was not the jokes but the stakes, not the banter but the danger, not the lightness but the weight. Ignoring the comedy, playing to the chases and the danger. Schifrin's articulation of his compositional philosophy for Rush Hour 2 is one of the most revealing statements about film scoring philosophy to emerge from any Hollywood production of its era. He described his approach as deliberately ignoring the comedy, trusting the actors to handle that dimension of the film's experience, and focusing instead on the chases and the danger. This is a compositional choice of real courage and real intelligence, because it runs directly counter to what many composers and directors would have done with the material. The temptation with an action comedy is to have the music comment on the comedy, to use playful orchestral stings, comic timing devices, the kind of musical winking that tells the audience how to feel about what they are watching. This approach treats the audience as needing guidance, as requiring the music to signal that something is funny or that a moment should not be taken too seriously. It is a defensive compositional strategy, and while it can be effective in the hands of a master, it can also undercut the genuine comedic work of the performers by adding a layer of editorial commentary that reduces rather than enhances the comedy's impact. Schifrin made the opposite choice. By treating the action and danger of Rush Hour 2 with the full seriousness of his symphonic resources, by playing the chases as genuine chases, the threats as genuine threats, the personal and emotional stakes as genuinely significant, he paradoxically enhanced rather than diminished the comedy. When the music takes the danger seriously, the audience's laughter at the comic elements becomes more genuine because they are laughing from a position of real investment rather than the slightly distanced amusement that comedy signaling music tends to produce. The jokes land harder when the surrounding musical landscape treats the situation with gravity. This is a sophisticated understanding of how comedy works in relation to drama, the insight that the funniest moments in a serious context are funnier than they would be in a context that has already told you to find everything funny. By refusing to musically signal the comedy, Schifrin allowed the comedy to discover its own timing and create its own impact, while the score worked to ensure that the action and danger and personal drama of Lee's investigation remained emotionally real for the audience throughout. Schifrin's comparison of his Rush Hour 2 score to the epic tradition of adventure film scoring, specifically invoking Raiders of the Lost Ark and the classic Errol Flynn adventure films of Hollywood's golden age, is enormously illuminating about both his compositional approach and his understanding of what Rush Hour 2 could and should aspire to be as a piece of cinema. Raiders of the Lost Ark, with John Williams' landmark score, represents perhaps the most successful example in cinema history of the symphonic adventure score, music that invests action and adventure with genuine grandeur, that treats its heroes and their journeys with the full weight of orchestral tradition, and that creates an emotional architecture expansive enough to support both the comedy and the danger of an action-adventure film without reducing either. Williams' score for Raiders does not musically signal that Indiana Jones is funny when he is being funny or that the danger is scary when things are scary. It simply provides a consistent and powerful musical environment within which all of those things can happen with full impact. The Errol Flynn reference points even further back, to the swashbuckling adventure films of the 1930s and 1940s, scored by composers like Erich Wolfgang Korngold and Max Steiner, where orchestral music played the hero's journey with unironic grandeur and helped establish the very vocabulary of cinematic adventure scoring that all subsequent adventure film composers have built upon. Schifrin, trained in classical tradition, deeply familiar with the history of film scoring, saw in Rush Hour 2 the opportunity to connect the film to that tradition, to give Lee and Carter's partnership and their investigation the musical weight of genuine heroism rather than the lighter touch of genre entertainment. This was an audacious choice, and it was the right one. By scoring Rush Hour 2 as though it were a genuine epic adventure, by treating Lee's journey to uncover the truth about his father's death with the same musical seriousness that a composer would bring to a Greek tragedy, Schifrin helped the film achieve a depth and resonance that its surface entertainment level alone could not have produced. The music tells the audience that what they are watching matters, that the stakes are real, that the characters are worth caring about deeply. And audiences responded to that, not necessarily consciously, not in ways they could articulate if asked why they cared so much about Lee finding out who killed his father, but emotionally and viscerally in exactly the ways that great film scoring operates. Mozart and the Symphony Orchestra, energy without drums. One of the most intellectually fascinating aspects of Schifrin's discussion of the Rush Hour 2 score is his invocation of Mozart in the context of rhythmic energy. The observation that Mozart did not need a rhythm section to drive his music, that the symphony orchestra, properly deployed, contains within itself the capacity to generate enormous rhythmic energy and momentum, reflects a deep understanding of orchestral composition and its possibilities that comes from decades of work at the highest levels of classical and film music. This is not simply a statement about instrumentation. It is a statement about compositional philosophy, about the belief that energy in music is not primarily a function of explicit rhythmic drive generated by drums, bass, and electric guitars, but of harmonic tension, melodic momentum, orchestral texture, and the specific ways that a skilled composer can use the interplay between orchestral sections to create forward motion and excitement. The strings can drive. The brass can create rhythmic energy through their articulation and phrasing. The woodwinds can generate momentum through rapid figuration and melodic development. Percussion, used selectively and intelligently, can emphasize and accent rather than simply drive. For Rush Hour 2, this meant that Schifrin could create action sequences of genuine propulsive energy, chase music that drives forward with real excitement, fight music that crackles with tension and physical energy, without relying on the contemporary musical vocabulary of drums and electric guitars that might have seemed the obvious choice for an action film of this kind. The result is a score that sounds genuinely different from most action film music of its era, that occupies its own sonic territory rather than simply reflecting the prevailing conventions of Hollywood scoring at the turn of the millennium. This distinctiveness is itself a significant artistic achievement. Film scores that sound like everything else of their moment tend to date poorly. They become sonic markers of a specific period rather than timeless musical expressions of the film's content. By choosing the symphonic path, by following Mozart's example of generating energy through compositional craft rather than rhythmic convention, Schifrin created a score that would age considerably more gracefully than most action film music of 2001. One that would continue to serve the film effectively regardless of how much the surrounding musical culture changed. One dimension of Schifrin's compositional challenge for Rush Hour 2 that deserves acknowledgement is the cross-cultural nature of the film itself. Rush Hour 2 moves between Hong Kong and America, between Chinese and American cultural contexts, between the Hong Kong police force and the Lapt, between triad crime and Las Vegas capitalism. The film's identity is explicitly intercultural. It draws its energy and its comedy from the meeting of different worlds, and its musical score needed to navigate that same territory. Schifrin's own background made him uniquely suited to this challenge. A man who grew up in Argentina, trained in European classical tradition, spent formative years in jazz, and built a Hollywood career spanning multiple genres and cultural contexts is not easily intimidated by the requirement to synthesize different musical vocabularies. His score for Rush Hour 2 manages to invoke the grandeur of the Western symphonic tradition while remaining alert to the specific cultural textures of the Hong Kong sequences, creating musical environments that feel appropriate to their settings without resorting to the kind of crude musical exoticism that lesser composers might have employed. This cultural sensitivity in the scoring mirrors the film's own approach to its cross-cultural themes. Just as Rush Hour 2 treats both Chinese and American culture with genuine respect and finds humor in their intersection without mocking either, Schifrin's score treats the musical heritage of both worlds with respect, drawing on the resources of the symphony orchestra, itself a product of European tradition, in ways that serve the full complexity of the story being told. The score's place in Schifrin's legacy. In the context of Lalo Schifrin's extraordinary career, the Rush Hour 2 score represents a late-career statement of compositional confidence and ambition that befits someone of his stature and experience. The decision to approach a mainstream Hollywood action comedy with the full resources of the symphony orchestra, to refuse the obvious rhythmic conventions of the genre, and to play the emotional and dramatic stakes with complete seriousness was the decision of a composer who understood his craft deeply enough to trust his instincts even when those instincts ran counter to prevailing convention. The score's success, both in terms of how it serves the film and in terms of Schifrin's own evident satisfaction with what it achieved, speaks to the particular freedom that comes from genuine mastery. A composer less secure in his abilities might have played it safe, given the director a score that sounded like what everyone expected and collected his fee without taking creative risks. Schifrin, with decades of exceptional work behind him and a musical vocabulary that encompassed everything from jazz to classical to the full range of Hollywood genre scoring, had the confidence to do something different, something more ambitious, something that treated Rush Hour 2 as an opportunity for genuine artistic expression rather than simply professional competence. The result is one of the most distinctive and underappreciated scores in the action comedy genre, music that consistently elevates the material it accompanies, that gives Lee and Carter's partnership and their investigation the musical weight of genuine heroism, and that demonstrates, with every bar, the difference between a score that merely accompanies a film and one that actively participates in making it something more than it might when Lalo Schifrin sat down to realize his symphonic Vision for Rush Hour 2. The ensemble he chose to perform that vision was the Hollywood Studio Symphony, an orchestra whose very name encapsulates something essential about the relationship between classical music tradition and the specific demands of film scoring. The Hollywood Studio Symphony is not a permanent ensemble in the conventional sense of a standing orchestra with a fixed membership that rehearses and performs together continuously throughout a season. It is instead a pool of the finest session musicians working in Los Angeles, assembled for specific recording projects and representing the absolute apex of what professional orchestral performance in a recording context can achieve. Understanding what the Hollywood Studio Symphony represents requires understanding something about the ecology of professional music making in Los Angeles, which has been the center of film music recording for most of cinema's history. The musicians who constitute this ensemble are not simply skilled, they are among the most accomplished orchestral musicians in the world, people who combine classical conservatory training of the highest level with the specific and demanding skill set required for film score recording, which differs from concert performance in ways that are subtle but significant. A film score recording session requires musicians who can sight-read complex contemporary scores with virtually no rehearsal time, who can respond immediately to a conductor's adjustments in tempo and dynamics while simultaneously watching a film on a screen above the recording stage, who can maintain the consistency of performance across multiple takes without the energy dropping or the attention wandering, and who can bring genuine musical expression to music they may be encountering for the first time in the session itself. The musicians of the Hollywood Studio Symphony do all of this routinely, professionally, and at a level of quality that makes the film scores recorded in Los Angeles among the finest orchestral recordings of any kind produced anywhere in the world. For Schifrin's symphonic vision, a score that deliberately invoked the grandeur of the great adventure film traditions, that asked the orchestra to generate energy and excitement and emotional weight without relying on the contemporary rhythmic conventions of drums and electric guitars, this ensemble was precisely the right instrument. They had the technical capability to execute his orchestrations with accuracy and the musical intelligence to bring them to life with genuine expression. The recording process for a film score like Rush Hour 2 is itself a remarkable undertaking. The orchestra records to picture, meaning they perform while watching the film on large screens above the recording stage, with Schifrin conducting and timing the music to synchronize precisely with what is happening on screen. Every musical cue must end at exactly the right moment, must swell to its climax in precisely the right frame, must breathe and develop in ways that serve the specific pacing of the scene rather than simply the internal logic of the music itself. This is technically demanding in ways that straightforward concert performance is not, requiring a level of coordination between musical expression and visual synchronization that only the most experienced film recording musicians can achieve consistently. The fact that Schifrin chose to perform his score with live musicians rather than relying on the electronic and synthesized alternatives that were increasingly available and economically attractive in 2001 is itself a significant artistic statement. Electronic mock-ups and synthesized orchestral sounds can approximate the effect of a real orchestra in ways that were becoming increasingly convincing at the turn of the millennium, and the cost savings of avoiding a live orchestra recording session are substantial. But there is a quality to live orchestral performance, a warmth, a breath, a subtle variability in tone and articulation that comes from dozens of human beings responding to each other and to the music in real time, that no electronic approximation has fully captured. For a score explicitly designed to invoke the tradition of the great symphonic adventure scores, the choice of live performance was not merely aesthetically preferable but artistically essential. Varis Sarabande and the soundtrack album. The release of the Rush Hour 2 soundtrack album on compact disc by Varis Sarabande in August 2001 represents an important chapter in the score's life beyond the film itself. Varis Sarabande is one of the most significant and respected labels in the history of film music recording and release, a company with a deep commitment to film music as an art form worthy of preservation and distribution independent of the films that gave it its original context. Founded in the 1970s and named after two pioneering composers of the 20th century, Varis Sarabande has over its history released hundreds of film score albums, including many scores that would otherwise have remained accessible only through the films themselves or through bootleg recordings of uncertain quality. The significance of a Varis Sarabande release goes beyond simple commercial distribution. It represents a form of curatorial endorsement, a statement that the music being released is of sufficient quality and interest to stand on its own as listening material independent of its cinematic context. Not every film score receives a commercial album release, and not every commercial album release reaches the level of quality and care that Varis Sarabande consistently brings to its productions. A Schifrin score on Varis Sarabande is, in the world of film music collecting and appreciation, a release that carries genuine prestige. The timing of the album release, in August 2001, coinciding with the film's theatrical run, was strategically intelligent as well as artistically appropriate. Audiences who experienced the score in the cinema and responded to its symphonic grandeur could immediately seek out the album and engage with Schifrin's music as a standalone listening experience. Film score collectors and enthusiasts of orchestral music could access the work without waiting for the uncertain and often delayed home video releases that were the only other way to hear a film score repeatedly. The simultaneous release of film and soundtrack album created a mutually reinforcing cultural presence, the film driving interest in the album deepening engagement with the film. For Schifrin personally, the Varis Sarabande release represented the preservation of his Rush Hour 2 work in the most appropriate and highest quality format available for music of its kind. A composer who has spent a lifetime creating music that serves films, music that exists in an inherently collaborative and often commercially driven context, deserves to have that music preserved and made available in conditions that respect its artistic integrity, and Varis Sarabande's commitment to exactly that kind of preservation made it the ideal home for the Rush Hour 2 score. The prophet who wasn't. Schifrin on Rush Hour 3. The moment in a 2001 interview with Dan Goldwasser for Soundtrack.net when Schifrin was asked whether he would score Rush Hour 3 and responded with the playful deflection, declaring himself not a prophet, is one of those small anecdotal moments that becomes retrospectively significant once the rest of the story is known. In 2001, Rush Hour 3 did not yet exist in any concrete form. Rush Hour 2 had not yet been released, its extraordinary commercial success had not yet been confirmed, and the question of whether a third film would follow was entirely speculative. Schifrin's response was modest, non-committal, and lightly humorous, the appropriate response of a professional who knows better than to make commitments about projects that may or may not materialize. What makes the anecdote resonant is what actually happened. By 2007, 6 years after that interview, Rush Hour 3 was in production, and Schifrin did indeed compose the score, completing the trilogy of Rush Hour scores and bringing his musical contributions to the franchise to a natural conclusion. The journey from the playful non-prophecy of 2001 to the actual completion of the third score in 2007 traces a 6-year arc that encompasses both the remarkable sustained popularity of the Rush Hour franchise and Schifrin's own continued engagement with film scoring well into his 70s. The additional significance of the Rush Hour 3 score is that it turned out to be Schifrin's last motion picture score, the final chapter of one of the most remarkable careers in the history of film music. A composer who began working in Hollywood in the 1960s, who created some of the most iconic themes in the history of television and film scoring, who brought jazz sophistication and classical depth and extraordinary rhythmic invention to the art of film music across 5 decades, ended his scoring career with the franchise he had helped establish musically in 1998. There is something poetically appropriate about that conclusion, the Rush Hour trilogy becoming not just a high point of Schifrin's later career but its final statement, the work with which one of film music's greatest figures chose, whether by design or circumstance, to end his contributions to the art form. The premiere on the Rush Hour Express, marketing as event. The theatrical release of Rush Hour 2 on August 3, 2001 was preceded by one of the most imaginative and genuinely distinctive premiere events in Hollywood marketing history. On July 26, 2001, more than a week before the film's official opening, Rush Hour 2 received its world premiere on board United Airlines Flight 1, a specially renamed service from Los Angeles to Hong Kong that for the occasion became the Rush Hour Express. This was not a conventional red carpet premiere at a Los Angeles or New York cinema. It was a premiere conducted 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, on a commercial aircraft, making the journey between the two cities whose cultural collision is the central premise of the entire Rush Hour franchise. The conceptual elegance of this premiere choice deserves genuine appreciation. Rush Hour 2 is a film fundamentally about the connection and contrast between America and Hong Kong, between Western and Eastern cultures, between Los Angeles and the Chinese world that Lee inhabits. Premiering it on the flight between Los Angeles and Hong Kong, literally in the air between the two worlds the film brings together, was a piece of promotional thinking with real imaginative flair. It turned the premiere itself into a metaphor for the film's central concerns, creating an event that was newsworthy precisely because it embodied something genuine about the film it was celebrating rather than simply being another Hollywood spectacle staged for cameras and celebrity attention. The collaboration that made this premiere possible involved three distinct entities: the Hong Kong Board of Tourism, United Airlines, and New Line Cinema, working together toward complementary but distinct goals. For New Line Cinema, the premiere was a publicity event of unusual memorability that generated coverage and attention in ways that a conventional premiere could not. For United Airlines, the partnership provided branding value and an association with a major Hollywood release that was expected to be one of the summer's biggest hits. For the Hong Kong Board of Tourism, the collaboration was an opportunity to leverage the film's setting and enormous anticipated audience for direct tourism promotion, an opportunity to turn the excitement surrounding Rush Hour 2 into actual increased interest in Hong Kong as a travel destination. The marketing campaign, reaching 3 million travelers. The marketing initiative that accompanied the premiere extended well beyond the single Flight 1 event. United Airlines and the Hong Kong Board of Tourism collaborated on a campaign that ran throughout July and August 2001 on all domestic United Airlines flights, a period that corresponds precisely to Rush Hour 2's theatrical release window. The campaign reached an expected 3 million passengers across the domestic United network, making it one of the most geographically distributed film marketing initiatives of its era. The content of the campaign was thoughtfully constructed to serve both the film's promotional interests and the tourism goals of the Hong Kong board. Passengers on domestic United flights during this period were exposed to trailers for Rush Hour 2, conventional film marketing material that built anticipation for the theatrical release, but also to Hong Kong travel videos designed to inspire the very passengers who had just watched the film's promotional material to consider Hong Kong as their next international destination. This dual content strategy created a logical and mutually reinforcing sequence: see the film's trailer, become excited about Hong Kong through the film's setting, watch the travel video, consider visiting. This kind of integrated marketing, using a film's cultural moment to drive interest in a real destination while simultaneously using the destination's promotional infrastructure to amplify the film's reach, was relatively sophisticated for 2001, anticipating the kind of film tourism partnerships that have become considerably more common in the years since. The New Zealand tourism boom driven by the Lord of the Rings films, the various destination marketing campaigns tied to James Bond locations, the increased visitor numbers to locations featured in popular franchises, all of these reflect the same basic insight that Rush Hour 2's marketing team was acting on in the summer of 2001, that a popular film creates genuine desire to visit its setting, and that this desire can be channeled and amplified through targeted partnership with the relevant tourism authorities. For Hong Kong specifically, the timing of the partnership was significant. The territory had returned to Chinese sovereignty in 1997 and was working to maintain and develop its international profile as both a business center and a tourism destination in a period of considerable transition and adjustment. The association with a Hollywood blockbuster, and specifically with a film that portrayed Hong Kong as a vibrant, exciting, visually spectacular city full of energy and cultural richness, was exactly the kind of international cultural endorsement that tourism promotion budgets struggle to generate through conventional advertising. The August 3rd release and its immediate context. Rush Hour 2's official theatrical release on August 3, 2001 placed it at the heart of the summer blockbuster season, the period of the year when Hollywood deploys its most commercially ambitious productions and when audiences are most willing to engage with large-scale entertainment spectacle. The August placement was strategically sound. The major summer competition had largely played out through June and July, and Rush Hour 2 arrived at a moment when the market had space for a new dominant film to establish itself. The film's release came at a moment when the buddy cop action comedy as a genre was in a particular place in Hollywood's cultural ecology. The first Rush Hour had demonstrated in 1998 that the formula could generate enormous returns when executed with the right combination of action, comedy, and star chemistry. Rush Hour 2 arrived with all of those elements intact and, in several respects, enhanced, a bigger budget allowing more spectacular action sequences, more exotic and visually rich locations, a supporting cast of greater depth and caliber, and a score of genuinely symphonic ambition that gave the film a sonic grandeur its predecessor had not attempted. The premiere event on the Rush Hour Express and the subsequent marketing campaign through United Airlines had successfully built anticipation and awareness through channels that complemented rather than simply duplicated conventional film advertising. By the time August 3rd arrived, Rush Hour 2 had already achieved a cultural presence that went beyond what trailers and posters alone could have generated. It had become a conversation, an event, something that audiences felt they had been anticipating and invited to participate in. The intersection of music, marketing, and meaning. What connects the seemingly disparate elements of this chapter of Rush Hour 2's story? Schifrin's work with the Hollywood Studio Symphony, the Varese Sarabande album release, the Prophet's disclaimer about Rush Hour 3, the premiere on the Rush Hour Express, and the United Airlines marketing campaign is the consistent recognition by everyone involved that Rush Hour 2 was more than a film. It was a cultural event with multiple dimensions, touching multiple audiences through multiple channels, and making connections between entertainment and geography and music and tourism and cultural exchange that few films of its era attempted so ambitiously. Schifrin understood this when he composed a symphonic score that treated the film's adventure as worthy of genuine orchestral grandeur. Varese Sarabande understood it when they committed to releasing that score as a standalone album deserving of preservation and appreciation. United Airlines and the Hong Kong Board of Tourism understood it when they designed a premiere and marketing campaign that turned the film's geographical and cultural setting into an invitation for real-world engagement. And the 3 million domestic air travelers who encountered Rush Hour 2's marketing materials during the summer of 2001 experienced, perhaps without fully realizing it, a piece of promotional thinking that had taken the film's central themes of cross-cultural connection and given them practical, commercial, and genuinely imaginative expression in the world outside the cinema. Opening weekend, the explosion that changed the summer. When Rush Hour 2 opened on August 3, 2001, the numbers that came back from theater box offices across North America were not merely good, they were historically significant. The film earned $67.4 million in its opening weekend across 3,118 locations, claiming the number one position at the domestic box office with a dominance that surprised even the most optimistic projections from New Line Cinema's distribution team. This was not simply a successful opening weekend. It was a statement, a definitive declaration that Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker's partnership had achieved a level of audience loyalty and commercial magnetism that placed them in genuinely rarefied company among Hollywood's biggest draws. To fully appreciate what $67.4 million in a single opening weekend meant in August 2001, it is necessary to understand the context in which that number landed. August had historically been regarded as a somewhat secondary summer month, a period when the peak of summer blockbuster season was considered to have already passed, when the biggest releases of the summer had already opened in June and July, and when the audience for large-scale spectacle entertainment was thought to be somewhat depleted by the succession of major releases that had preceded it. Films that opened in August were often very good films, sometimes excellent films, but they were not typically expected to generate the kind of opening weekend numbers that the prestige June and July releases commanded. Rush Hour 2 demolished this assumption entirely. Its $67.4 million opening weekend was not just strong for an August release, it was the biggest August opening weekend in the history of American cinema at that point, surpassing the previous record held by The Sixth Sense. That M. Night Shyamalan film had opened in August 1999 to enormous success and widespread acclaim, becoming one of the defining cultural events of that summer, and its opening weekend had stood as proof that August could produce genuine blockbuster results. Rush Hour 2 took that proof and amplified it dramatically, establishing a new ceiling for what August theatrical releases could achieve that would stand unchallenged for 6 full years until The Bourne Ultimatum surpassed it in 2007. The record books opening weekend achievements in full. The records that Rush Hour 2 set or approached during its opening weekend constitute one of the most impressive collections of commercial achievements in the history of the buddy cop action comedy genre. Beyond the August opening weekend record, the film simultaneously broke New Line Cinema's own internal record for biggest opening weekend, surpassing the previous record holder Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. This was a significant milestone for the studio, New Line Cinema, which had built its identity around franchises and genre entertainment, now had its biggest ever opening weekend attached to one of its signature properties, validating years of investment in the Rush Hour franchise. Rush Hour 2 also entered the record books as having the 4th highest opening weekend of all time at the moment of its release, trailing only The Mummy Returns, Planet of the Apes, and The Lost World, Jurassic Park. The company it kept in that list speaks volumes about the kind of commercial force the film represented. The Mummy Returns and Planet of the Apes were both 2001 summer releases that had generated massive opening weekends earlier in the season. The Lost World, Jurassic Park was the sequel to the most successful film in cinema history at the time of its release. To open with a weekend number that placed Rush Hour 2 in that specific tier was an achievement that transcended genre. It meant that an action comedy with an Asian American star was competing on equal commercial terms with science fiction spectacles and franchise sequels of the most established and resource-intensive kind. The film also distinguished itself by becoming one of only 4 2001 releases to generate $60 million in their first 3 days of release. The other 3 films in this exclusive group, Monsters Incorporated, The Mummy Returns, and Planet of the Apes, represented the absolute commercial elite of Hollywood's output in that year, films with enormous marketing budgets, established franchise recognition, and the kind of mass audience appeal that studios spend hundreds of millions of dollars attempting to manufacture. Rush Hour 2 earned its place in that group through the genuine and irreplaceable asset of a beloved central partnership that had been proven across one previous film and that audiences were willing to turn out for in extraordinary numbers. One of the most revealing indicators of Rush Hour 2's commercial strength is not its opening weekend number, impressive as that figure was, but the sustained performance that followed. The film remained in the domestic box office top 10 for 10 consecutive weeks, until October 11th, a run of theatrical dominance that speaks to something beyond the initial surge of audience excitement and encompasses the kind of genuine word-of-mouth enthusiasm and repeat viewership that only genuinely satisfying films generate. 10 weeks in the top 10 is a duration that separates the merely commercially successful from the genuinely beloved. A film that opens huge and then drops precipitously from the charts, falling 50 or 60% in its second weekend and continuing that decline sharply, is a film that benefited from marketing and anticipation more than from the quality of the experience it delivered. Audiences came because they were told to come, but they did not recommend it to others or return themselves. Rush Hour 2's staying power tells a different story. It tells the story of a film that audiences genuinely enjoyed, that delivered what it promised and perhaps more than it promised, that generated the kind of enthusiastic recommendation that brings in the friend groups and family members who missed the opening weekend, that created the water cooler conversation and genuine cultural buzz that no marketing campaign can fabricate. The second weekend number of $31.5 million, achieved even in the face of competition from American Pie 2, which took the top spot that weekend, is further evidence of this sustained appeal. A 35% drop from a $67 million opening to $31 million is a relatively modest decline by Hollywood standards. It indicates that the audience for Rush Hour 2 was broad enough and enthusiastic enough to maintain strong attendance even as new competition arrived and the initial opening weekend urgency faded. $226 million domestic, the full accounting. Rush Hour 2's total North American gross of $226.2 million placed it among the genuine commercial giants of its year and established it as by far the highest-grossing entry in the Rush Hour franchise. The contrast with both predecessor and successor films illustrates the particular commercial peak that Rush Hour 2 represented. The original Rush Hour, which had itself been a major commercial success in 1998 and had launched the franchise on remarkably strong financial foundations, did not match Rush Hour 2's total. Rush Hour 3, released 6 years later in 2007 with the full benefit of franchise recognition and nostalgic audience affection for the first two films, also fell short of what Rush Hour 2 achieved in 2001. This makes Rush Hour 2 not just the best-performing film in its own franchise but something rarer, a sequel that genuinely outperformed its predecessor by a significant margin while also remaining the high-water mark that its own successor could not reach. In the history of Hollywood franchises, this is an unusual distinction. Most successful franchises follow one of two trajectories: either each installment performs roughly comparably to the previous one, with modest fluctuations driven by critical reception and competition, or they follow a declining curve where the first film establishes a ceiling that subsequent entries approach but do not exceed. Rush Hour 2 broke the first pattern by dramatically outperforming Rush Hour, and it established a ceiling that Rush Hour 3 proved unable to clear. It occupies a singular position in the franchise's commercial history, the irreplaceable apex, the moment when everything aligned perfectly. International performance and global appeal. The international gross of approximately $121.2 million, which brought the worldwide total to $347.4 million, reflects something important about the particular cross-cultural appeal of the Rush Hour franchise that distinguishes it from many of its Hollywood contemporaries. Rush Hour 2 was not primarily an international success story. Its domestic performance was so dominant that it would have been commercially significant even without international receipts. But the international numbers add a dimension to the film's commercial achievement that goes beyond simple box office mathematics. The Rush Hour franchise's international appeal was, from its beginning, rooted in something more genuine than the standard Hollywood calculation of adjusting marketing materials for different territories. The film's central premise, the partnership between a Hong Kong police officer and an American detective, the explicit engagement with Chinese culture and Hong Kong specifically as a setting and cultural reference point, gave them an authenticity of cross-cultural engagement that translated into genuine international audience interest. Asian markets in particular responded to the Rush Hour films with enthusiasm that went beyond the typical response to Hollywood action comedies, because these were films that treated Asian characters, Asian settings, and Asian cultural contexts as central rather than peripheral. For Jackie Chan specifically, the international dimension of Rush Hour 2's success was continuous with a global career that had long operated on a scale most Western actors never approach. Chan had been a major star across Asian markets for decades before his Hollywood breakthrough with Rush Hour in 1998, and his international fan base, built through decades of Hong Kong action cinema that had circulated globally through various distribution channels, contributed meaningfully to Rush Hour 2's international performance. These were not audiences discovering Jackie Chan through a Hollywood film. Many of them were longtime fans of his work who were now being given the opportunity to see that work through the distribution infrastructure of a major Hollywood studio release. Surpassing The Karate Kid, a martial arts milestone. Among the most symbolically significant of Rush Hour 2's commercial achievements was its surpassing of The Karate Kid as the highest-grossing martial arts action film in cinema history at the time. The Karate Kid, released in 1984, had occupied that distinction for 17 years, nearly 2 decades during which numerous martial arts films and action films featuring martial arts elements had come and gone without dislodging it from the top of the genre's commercial rankings. That Rush Hour 2 finally surpassed it speaks to both the film's extraordinary commercial performance and the particular moment it occupied in the history of martial arts-influenced Hollywood cinema. The significance of this record goes beyond the specific numbers. The Karate Kid was a film that had achieved genuine cultural ubiquity. It was not just a successful film but a touchstone of an entire generation's cultural experience, a film whose characters, dialogue, and imagery had penetrated American popular culture so thoroughly that they became reference points even for people who had never seen the film. Surpassing it commercially required not just a strong opening weekend but sustained cultural presence, the kind of broad audience appeal that transcends demographics and speaks to multiple generations simultaneously. Rush Hour 2's ability to clear that bar is a testament to how comprehensively Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker's partnership had captured the popular imagination. The buddy comedy hierarchy, behind only Men in Black. Rush Hour 2's ranking as the second highest grossing buddy comedy film at the time of its release, trailing only the 1997 phenomenon Men in Black, places it in a very specific and very distinguished commercial context. Men in Black, with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones as its central pairing, had established new commercial standards for the buddy comedy genre in 1997, benefiting from the extraordinary mid-1990s peak of Will Smith's commercial appeal, from a genuinely inventive science fiction premise, and from a chemistry between its stars that critics and audiences found immediately irresistible. For Rush Hour 2 to rank second behind only Men in Black in the history of buddy comedy box office performance is to acknowledge that the Rush Hour franchise had achieved something genuinely comparable, not identical, not derivative, but comparable in the specific quality of its central partnership and the breadth of its commercial appeal. Chan and Tucker's Lee and Carter had joined Smith and Jones's J and K in the small and exclusive company of buddy comedy pairings that had crossed cultural boundaries, transcended demographic categories, and generated the kind of universal audience affection that produces truly exceptional commercial results. The PG-13 significance and demographic reach. Rush Hour 2's distinction as the second highest grossing PG-13 rated film of 2001 in the domestic market reflects something strategically important about how the film was positioned and who it was able to reach. The PG-13 rating occupies a crucial commercial sweet spot in Hollywood's rating system. It is accessible to the teenage audience that represents a major proportion of theatrical attendance while remaining appropriate for family viewing in ways that R-rated films are not. A film that earns a PG-13 rating while delivering genuine action excitement, genuine edge, and genuine adult entertainment is a film that can reach virtually every audience segment simultaneously. Rush Hour 2 achieved this balance with considerable skill. The action sequences were intense and kinetic enough to satisfy audiences seeking genuine excitement. The comedy was smart and character-driven enough to reward adult viewers rather than pandering to the lowest common denominator. The emotional content, Lee's investigation of his father's death, the genuine depth of the Lee-Carter friendship, provided the kind of resonance that makes entertainment feel meaningful rather than simply diverting. And all of this was delivered within a rating framework that meant a family could go together, a group of teenagers could attend without restriction, and adults could enjoy without feeling that the content had been sanitized below the level of genuine engagement. The lasting legacy of the numbers. Taken together, Rush Hour 2's commercial achievement, $347 million worldwide, 10 weeks in the domestic top 10, multiple box office records across genre and calendar categories, franchise high performance that neither predecessor nor successor could match, constitutes one of the most complete commercial successes in the history of the action comedy genre. These numbers are not merely evidence of financial success. They are evidence of something more fundamental and more interesting, the evidence that audiences around the world, in enormous and unprecedented numbers, genuinely loved watching Lee and Carter together, genuinely responded to the specific alchemy of Chan and Tucker's partnership, and genuinely wanted more of what Rush Hour 2 offered them. Box office records are impermanent by nature. Every record that Rush Hour 2 set has since been surpassed, as records always eventually are in a growing theatrical market with escalating budgets and expanding global distribution. But what those records represent in the moment of their setting. The critical reception of Rush Hour 2 represents one of the most striking and instructive examples in Hollywood history of the gap that can exist between professional critical opinion and genuine audience response. On one side of this divide sat a film that earned a 50% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 127 reviews, a score of 48 out of 100 on Metacritic indicating mixed or average reviews, and some genuinely harsh assessments from individual critics of considerable stature and influence. On the other side sat $347 million in worldwide box office receipts, 10 weeks in the domestic top 10, multiple box office records, and a CinemaScore grade of A from audiences polled during the opening weekend, the latter being perhaps the most telling single indicator of how real audiences, as opposed to professional critics, experienced the film. This divide is not simply a case of lowbrow popular taste triumphing over sophisticated critical judgment. It is a more interesting and more complex phenomenon than that reductive framing suggests, and understanding it requires examining both what the critics objected to and what the audiences responded to with such extraordinary enthusiasm. The gap between a 50% critical approval rating and an A cinema score, between professional ambivalence and genuine audience delight, tells us something important not just about Rush Hour 2 specifically but about the nature of popular entertainment, the criteria by which critics and audiences evaluate films differently, and the particular qualities that make some films matter enormously to the people who watch them even when those films fail to satisfy the standards of formal criticism. The Rotten Tomatoes verdict and its implications. A 50% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes is, by the binary logic of that platform's rating system, precisely on the boundary between fresh and rotten, a film that exactly half of the critics who reviewed it found sufficiently worthy of recommendation and half found insufficiently worthy. This precise 50-50 split is itself revealing, because it suggests not a consensus of disappointment but a genuine division of opinion in which reasonable, thoughtful critics came to opposite conclusions about the same film. The critical consensus articulated by Rotten Tomatoes identifies two primary sources of critical dissatisfaction. First, that the film does not feel as fresh or funny as the original Rush Hour, a critique rooted in the natural comparison that any sequel invites and the inevitable diminishment that comes when something that felt genuinely new and surprising the first time is experienced in a familiar form the second time. Second, that the stunts lack some of the intricacy normally seen in Jackie Chan's films, a critique that reflects genuine knowledge of Chan's extraordinary body of work and the specific standards that his Hong Kong productions had established for action choreography and physical performance. Both of these criticisms are fair on their own terms and deserve serious engagement. The freshness critique is almost unavoidable for any sequel. Rush Hour in 1998 had the genuine surprise of novelty. No one had seen this specific combination of performers, this specific cultural collision, this specific brand of comedy and action together before. The first viewing experience carried the charge of genuine discovery, the particular pleasure of encountering something unexpected that exceeds the modest expectations you brought to it. Rush Hour 2, by definition, could not replicate that specific pleasure. Audiences and critics alike knew what they were getting before they sat down, and the film was being evaluated not against modest or neutral expectations but against the memory of what its predecessor had achieved. The stunt critique reflects the specific expectations that Jackie Chan's decades of extraordinary physical cinema had created. Chan's Hong Kong films, Police Story, Project A, Armor of God, and dozens of others, had established benchmarks for action choreography and physical performance that were simply without parallel in world cinema. The ingenuity of the situations he put himself in, the genuine danger he regularly subjected himself to, the complexity of the physical sequences he designed and executed, all of these things had created a standard against which his Hollywood work was inevitably measured, and against which it sometimes appeared to fall short. Hollywood production contexts, with their union regulations, insurance requirements, and safety protocols, constrained what Chan could do in ways that his Hong Kong productions had not. The Metacritic score. Mapping the critical landscape. The Metacritic score of 48 out of 100, derived from 28 reviews and indicating mixed or average reception, provides a more nuanced picture than the binary Rotten Tomatoes rating because Metacritic's weighted average system attempts to capture degrees of enthusiasm and disappointment rather than simply sorting reviews into positive and negative categories. A score of 48 suggests a distribution of reviews in which genuine enthusiasm from some critics is balanced against genuine disappointment from others, with a significant middle ground of critics who found the film competent but unexceptional. This distribution reflects the reality of Rush Hour 2's critical landscape more accurately than any single representative review. The film was not universally condemned. It was not a critical disaster of the kind that generates consensus mockery or dismissal. It was a film that some critics found genuinely enjoyable and well executed, others found genuinely disappointing, and many found somewhere between those extremes, a competent, occasionally excellent action comedy that did not consistently live up to the full potential of its central partnership and the standard of its predecessor. The fact that the score sits just below the 50 mark, in territory that Metacritic characterizes as mixed or average, suggests that the balance of critical opinion tipped just barely toward disappointment rather than satisfaction. This is a meaningfully different verdict from genuine critical rejection. A film scoring in the 20s or 30s on Metacritic is a film that professional critics have largely agreed is badly made or without merit. A film scoring 48 is a film that is genuinely debated, genuinely evaluated on its specific merits and failures, and found to fall just short of meeting critical standards of quality, not dismissed, but not celebrated either. Roger Ebert's 1.5-star review from the Chicago Sun-Times represents the most prominent and most clearly articulated expression of critical disappointment with Rush Hour 2. Ebert, whose reviews carried enormous cultural weight in 2001 and whose opinion was sought and respected by both industry professionals and general audiences, was not a critic who dismissed action comedies or genre entertainment on principle. He had championed numerous popular films that more snobbish critics dismissed, and his opinions were grounded in genuine engagement with cinema across all genres and levels of ambition. His specific critique of Chris Tucker as an anchor around the ankles of the film's humor is worth examining carefully because it represents a genuinely argued position rather than reflexive dismissal. Ebert's discomfort with Tucker's performance style in Rush Hour 2 reflects a critical perspective that sees Tucker's particular brand of comedy, the volume, the physical expressiveness, the rapid-fire verbal delivery, the relentless self-promotion of Carter's character, as exceeding the boundaries of what serves the film rather than simply serving those boundaries well. From this perspective, Tucker's performance crowds out space that might be better used for quieter comic moments, for genuine character development, or for the kind of physical comedy at which Jackie Chan excels and which requires a certain stillness and timing in the surrounding performance to land most effectively. This is a coherent critical position, and it clearly resonated with a significant portion of the critical community that shared Ebert's reservations about Tucker's approach. But it is also a position that fundamentally misunderstands or rejects what Tucker's performance is attempting to do and what it achieves for the audience that responded to it so enthusiastically. Carter's loudness and self-promotion are not incidental features of the performance but essential expressions of the character, and the character's essential comedy comes precisely from the collision between Carter's enormous self-regard and the situations that repeatedly puncture it. An audience that finds that dynamic genuinely funny, and the CinemaScore grade of A suggests that the opening weekend audience found it very funny indeed, is not experiencing a lesser or less sophisticated form of comedy than the quieter, more restrained comedy Ebert might have preferred. They are experiencing a different kind of comedy, one calibrated to different tastes and executed with genuine skill. Robert Kohler's counter-assessment, the superior sequel. Robert Kohler's review in Variety, which called Rush Hour 2 a superior sequel and described it as the very model of the limber, transnational Hollywood action comedy, represents the opposite pole of the critical response and deserves equal attention precisely because it articulates clearly what the film's admirers found genuinely valuable about it. Kohler was not simply being contrarian or generous, he was identifying specific qualities that he found impressive and that he believed distinguished Rush Hour 2 from both its predecessor and from the broader landscape of Hollywood action comedy. The description of the film as transnational is particularly interesting and perceptive. Rush Hour 2 is unusual among Hollywood action comedies of its era precisely in the degree to which it takes seriously the cross-cultural dimensions of its central premise. The film moves between Hong Kong and America with a fluency and genuine cultural engagement that most Hollywood productions attempting similar cross-cultural stories do not achieve. The Hong Kong sequences feel authentically Hong Kong rather than Hollywood's idea of Hong Kong. The film's treatment of Chinese culture, triad criminal structures, Hong Kong police force dynamics, and the specific social textures of both cities it visits reflects genuine research and genuine respect rather than superficial exoticism. Calling it a superior sequel reflects Kohler's assessment that Rush Hour 2 successfully does what sequels are supposed to do, takes what worked in the original, develops it further, adds new dimensions and new stakes, and delivers a film that justifies its existence rather than simply cashing in on the predecessor's success. This is not the consensus critical view of Rush Hour 2, but it is a defensible one, and the commercial response of audiences suggests that many viewers shared Kohler's assessment even if they would not have articulated it in those terms. The CinemaScore grade. The audience speaks. The CinemaScore grade of A from audiences polled during Rush Hour 2's opening weekend is perhaps the most important single piece of critical data about the film, even though it tends to receive less attention than the professional critical scores from Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. CinemaScore surveys represent the immediate reactions of actual paying audiences, people who chose to spend money and time on the film and who are evaluating it against their expectations and against the standard of what they were hoping to experience when they bought their tickets. An A grade from opening weekend audiences means that the people who showed up for Rush Hour 2 were, overwhelmingly, satisfied or more than satisfied with what they received. They felt that the film delivered what it promised. They enjoyed themselves. They did not leave the theater feeling disappointed or cheated. In the specific context of an action comedy sequel, a genre and a format where audience expectations are shaped by strong prior experience and where the risk of disappointment is high because expectations are high, this grade of A is a remarkable achievement. The disconnect between the professional critical score of approximately 50% positive reviews and the audience cinema score of A represents something genuinely interesting about the specific pleasures that Rush Hour 2 offers. Professional critics evaluate films against standards that include freshness, originality, technical achievement, and comparison with the best of the form. Audiences evaluate films primarily against their own expectations and against the question of whether they enjoyed themselves. Rush Hour 2 excels against the audience standard in ways that it does not excel against certain critical standards. It is enormously entertaining, even if it is not original, even if the stunts are somewhat less intricate than Chan's Hong Kong work, even if Tucker's performance is more than some critics find comfortable. Understanding the disconnect, what critics and audiences value differently. The specific nature of the gap between critical and audience reception of Rush Hour 2 illuminates something important about how different evaluative frameworks interact with popular entertainment. Critics, particularly in the early 2000s, tended to evaluate action comedies against standards that privileged originality, restraint, technical innovation, and the kind of formal achievement that can be analyzed and articulated in a review. Against these standards, Rush Hour 2's acknowledged debt to its predecessor, Tucker's unrestrained performance style, and the comparative